Chapter 587. 3 days later, 1,500 soldiers of Operation Tooth Extraction boarded ships and set off for their first target, Redwater City. At the same time, according to the policy set in the strategy meeting, the other soldiers of the First Army also escorted ammunition and food to the northern region. They would follow the inland water network, pass through Redwater River, King City Canal, and San Juan River, and finally arrive at Deep Valley Town. In order to cope with such a large-scale deployment of troops, in addition to all the paddle steamers in Neverwinter, Roland also rented 30 sailing ships from Marjorie's Chamber of Commerce to transport war materials. In this way, he could deliver 3,000 soldiers and corresponding artillery ammunition to the northern region within a month, that is, before the arrival of July. If it was in the future, the transport scale of thousands of people would probably be completed by 3 or 4 river liners. But in this era, it was already an incredible pioneering work. After the Operation Tooth Extraction obtained enough God's Stones of Retaliation, the vanguard would also go to the northern region. Eventually, 4,500 soldiers would be gathered in Deep Valley Town and the church would be forced to fight in Coldwind Ridge. Of course, there were contingency plans. One was that the church moved extremely fast, such as sending a small number of God's Punishment Army along the impassable mountain range all the way to the south and directly to Neverwinter. The other was that the enemy abandoned the Holy City and entered the kingdom from the border between the Kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle. The 500 soldiers staying in Neverwinter were to guard against the former. Defending the city would always give them a certain advantage, especially with the support of 152mm long-song cannons. But the latter was a lose-lose situation. The First Army had to turn to a war of attrition, the church would lose the holy city of Hermes and suffer a heavy loss of faith and status, and Grey Castle would also lose a large number of people. Fortunately, the possibility of the second situation was very small. Without the holy city, the church would completely lose its foundation, and Grey Castle would still have a chance to recover after losing its population. As long as the Pope was not crazy, he would not use such a suicidal method. Edith Kant, the Pearl of the Northern Region, also left with the First Fleet. "Please rest assured, Your Majesty. I'll write to my father and ask him to take out half of the stored food in the northern region for the soldiers. The Lord of Deep Valley Town will also fully cooperate with all the requirements of the First Army." "Aren't you going back to the north?" Roland asked. "Compared to going home, I'd rather follow the First Army and participate in the upcoming battles." Edith stood at the side of the ship and raised her hand to flutter her long hair. She then placed her hand on her chest and saluted. "I'll leave my brother in your care. I'll take good care of him." "Thank you, Your Majesty. Then I will wait for you in Deep Valley Town when the real war comes." After the ship left, Nightingale's dissatisfied voice sounded in Roland's ear. "Tisk tisk, this is obviously a battle of life and death, but she makes it sound like a lover's date." "Huh? Really? You can't tell? That action of raising your hair. It's not like there's a strong wind blowing right now, it's practically unnecessary." Nightingale snorted coldly. "Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that she's already used to behaving like this to men. It's already an instinct. Are you still worried about that letter?" Roland shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "I told you it's impossible. By the way, is what she said reliable?" Nightingale replied reluctantly, "Basically, there's no problem. At least when she expressed her loyalty and discussed those battle plans, she was telling the truth." "That's enough." Roland exhaled. "Let's go back to the castle." During this period, although Neverwinter was facing the pressure brought by the war, there was also a lot of good news. The projects planned during the months of demons were gradually coming to an end, and the basic construction had ushered in a period of explosive results. The most important thing was that the western region finally had its own estuary. After receiving the news, Roland immediately informed the Ministry of Construction, and soon a batch of houses, warehouses, and temporary docks would be built on the shallow river. With a natural deep-water port as the foundation, larger ships could also be built. However, considering that Anna had already focused on military production, these shipbuilding plans had to be postponed until the end of the war. The supporting hub project, Route 67, had also been started. It set off from the Redwater River Bridge and connected the industrial area with the southern shallow river. The construction team consisted of the original workers from Kingdom Avenue. At the same time, Roland fulfilled his promise. Nearly half of the workers with excellent performance received official residency in Neverwinter and were issued identity cards. In addition, the first coke oven on North Slope Mountain had been put into operation. To be exact, it could have been put into operation earlier, but during the trial period, it had stumbled. For example, when the furnace was first turned on, the air in the furnace was not emptied, which caused the coal used for dry distillation to burn directly. Another time, the temperature and time were not controlled properly, which led to the failure of coking. Later, there was a serious accident where the exhaust pipe was blocked by smoke and dust, and the flames suddenly burst out of the furnace when the coke was released. Fortunately, with Summer's playback ability, the causes of these accidents were quickly found out and a series of improvements were made. A new batch of coke ovens was also being built in full swing. In addition to the infrastructure, military production also ushered in a breakthrough. The trial production of the howitzer, which could add an important weight to the war, was finally successful. Although the size of the whole shell was limited and the charge of the warhead was limited, it could still cause a fatal blow to the enemy within half a diameter of 10 meters. After the shell fragments were installed, this distance could be doubled. It was conceivable that if several 152mm cannons with a range of nearly 10 kilometers were deployed on the battlefield, they could bypass the preset position and directly hit the enemy's rear. People in this era had never experienced the terror of the King of War. The shock wave and shell fragments of the howitzer were absolutely destructive to the mass of enemies without any cover. Unfortunately, such a heavy thing could only be transported by hummingbirds. In the absence of hard roads, only 2 howitzers could be deployed at a time. Even so, Roland was not willing to give up such powerful firepower. In contrast, the news of the successful operation of the steam turbine model was not so important. After all, there were not enough people to research and develop new steam ships or thermal power generation. In a sense, the moment Neverwinter received the intelligence from the Kingdom of Dawn, it had already entered the wartime system. All plans had to make way for the war, and Anna was no exception. Now, her daily work was to process shells and fuses in the morning and cut the key parts needed for the heavy machine guns in the afternoon. The munitions factory produced bullets and revolving rifles in 3 shifts. Thanks to Mystery Moon and Candle, all kinds of machine tools could run at full capacity without any major problems. Not long after returning to the office, a messenger flight delivered a secret letter from the fjords. Tilly's reply? Roland quickly tore open the note and quickly scanned through the contents of the letter. After pondering for a while, he asked Nightingale to find Maggie. Take Sylvie and catch up with the fleet. Ask Iffy to do as the letter says. Chapter 588. After 2 days of sailing, villages and farmlands appeared on the desolate green field, and the city wall of Redwater City gradually appeared in front of the advance army. As the largest city on the Redwater River, it had a population and resources comparable to the old King's City. If it were not for the fact that Silver City had so many minerals, perhaps the ancestors of Wimbledon would have chosen Redwater City as the King's City instead of the current City of Dawn. Brian raised the telescope and observed for a while. What should we do when we arrive at the dock? Should we use the warship's cannons to intimidate them? That may arouse the hostility of their lord. Our primary target is the church. Everything else can be put aside. Iron Axe shook his head. According to your diplomatic process, we should first submit the document. After the fleet docked at the suburban dock, it immediately caused a commotion. As the soldiers lined up outside the dock, the city gate was quickly closed, and even the moat's drawbridge was pulled up. After Brian sent someone to deliver the document, he soon got a reply. The other side said that His Excellency welcomes the arrival of His Majesty's army, but needs to first send an envoy to the city to explain the situation. After understanding the situation, he will open the city gate and let us in, the soldier reported. What situation? Didn't the document make it very clear? Brian said unhappily. We are only targeting the church. Does he want to let those swindlers escape? Is this also your rule? Iron Axe turned his head and looked at the accompanying staff members. For nobles, it should be so, Perot's chief bodyguard Trav replied. After all, His Majesty is not here in person, and Redwater City is not under his jurisdiction. It is normal for the other side to have a suspicious attitude. As long as we send an envoy of suitable status to explain in detail, it will be fine. Suitable status? A big family that can be trusted by the Lord, Trav explained. For example, Honeysuckle in the western region. Iron Axe, Brian, and Vanner looked at each other. Before becoming the commander of the First Army, one of them was a Sand Nation, and the other two were civilians. Not only did they know nothing about noble communication, but they also did not have the status to talk to the lord of the city. If you ask me, it would be easier to just blast open the city gate, Brian said angrily. As long as they take 2 shots, they will know what is the right thing to do. Let me do it, Edith said. The Kant family is an aristocratic family in the northern region. My father is also a duke. It won't be a problem for him to be the messenger. What if this is a scam? Vanner said hesitantly. For example, the Lord of Redwater City has long colluded with the church. He will catch you after you go in and force us to retreat. That won't do him any good, and you won't do it either, right? Edith smiled and said, any noble with a normal brain wouldn't think of attacking the messenger. It would only arouse the resentment of other nobles, and it wouldn't affect the overall situation. If he was really in cahoots with the church, he would have sealed the city and started a war. In fact, up until now, they have not set up a bonfire or heated oil at the top of the city walls. I'll go with her, Sir Schilt said. At least I used to be a knight. If there is any danger, I can take care of her. Although I appreciate your concern, the Pearl of the Northern region doesn't need anyone to take care of her, Edith said confidently. Let's take a team of soldiers, Iron Axe finally decided. Once we hear the gunshots, we will attack. An hour later, the city gate slowly opened and the drawbridge was lowered. A group of people was stunned to see Miss Edith, who was escorted by a squad of the First Army and a row of silver-armored knights. Then, a chubby middle-aged man walked out. Although the man was dressed luxuriously, his manner seemed to be flattering her. At first glance, he looked like a servant. This is Earl Delta, the Lord of Redwater City. Edith came to the front of the crowd and introduced him. I also asked him to send a patrol to surround the church, so that the priests and believers won't have a chance to escape. Then she tilted her head and said, They are the commander of His Majesty's First Army, Sir Iron Axe, and Mr. Brian and Mr. Vanner. Iron Axe, what? It was probably the first time that the Earl had heard such an introduction. He could not help but be stunned. Don't worry about it, she said with a smile. This is what His Majesty is used to calling them. I see. Delta cleared his throat. I've long heard that Prince Roland. No, His Majesty's maverick way of doing things is indeed different. Well, Redwater City welcomes you. May I ask, does His Majesty really just want to eliminate the church rebels? This man is the Lord of Redwater City? Brian thought in surprise. This is so different from what I expected. Yes, Iron Axe nodded seriously. I think His Majesty's document has already written very clearly that the church is trying to annex the 4 kingdoms. The rebellion has become a fact, and you should have heard about the tragedies in the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Once the church resistors are eliminated, we will leave. Actually, there is no need to be so anxious. Delta rubbed his hands. I will hold a grand banquet in the castle tonight. I hope everyone can attend. Although he was inviting everyone, his eyes were fixed on the Pearl of the Northern region. Brian was about to refuse, but Edith readily agreed. Thank you for your kind invitation. It is our honor, but we have to first complete the task given by His Majesty. Of course. The Earl smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed. Under the guidance of the knight, the First Army began to enter the city in an orderly manner. While the Earl was not paying attention, Brian walked to Edith and asked in a low voice, Why did you agree to his invitation? He seems to have bad intentions. This is a common communication between nobles. It would be too rude to refuse, she said disapprovingly. Although I don't know why His Majesty completely excluded the nobles from the army, you are now representing His Majesty, so it is naturally impossible for you to completely refuse these things. And now that you have a good relationship with him, it will be much easier to recover Redwater City in the future. As for his bad intentions. She curled her lips and said, "Can a male noble show any other expression?" Brian was speechless for a moment. After a long time, he sighed and said, "Do you usually live like this?" "Apart from being a little boring, there is nothing bad about it," Edith said with a hint of sarcasm in her tone. "Why, have you never envied the life of a noble?" He opened his mouth but could not answer. Suddenly, there was a commotion in front of them. It seemed that someone was shouting something, and at the same time, there was the sound of gravel hitting the ground. "What happened?" the Earl asked loudly. Iron Axe had already raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. "All troops, listen up. Be on guard." The troops immediately stopped moving. The soldiers uniformly took down the rifles on their backs and quickly changed from a column to several horizontal lines. Chapter 589. Magic Reaction? Earl Delta turned his head and asked, "What's that?" "Tell your knight to get out of the way." Brian roared at him, not caring about etiquette. 09, Smalt Sagnet. Before his voice died away, a group of believers in indigo robes rushed out from the corner of the street and rushed into the group of knight leading the way. The impact of the attackers was so strong that even the horses were thrown to the ground. Several knights' legs were crushed by the mountain-like mounts before they could react. The others immediately drew their swords and rushed forward to fight the believers. The people on the street gave way. Many people were pushed to the ground in panic. Cries and cries for help came one after another. The scene was a mess for a while. They really rebelled. The Earl was surprised at first, and then he flew into a rage. Damn it, kill all these traitors. However, a flying blue stone made him shut his mouth. It was a part of the pavement on the street. The stone slabs rose into the air and slammed toward the knights. The speed was so fast that only a green afterimage could be seen. The armor of the knight who was hit instantly deflated. Blood spurted out from the gaps between the helmet and the joints. It seemed that there was no way for him to survive. Following that, more stone slabs flew out, even including the believers. Those who were hit vertically had their bones broken, and those who were hit horizontally were cut in half. Earl Delta was pulled to the side of the street by Brian before he could express his shock. "Fire!" Iron Axe ordered. Continuous gunshots rang out in the street. The people who were still standing fell down like wheat being cut down, and the originally chaotic front of the team became empty for a short while. When the smoke dissipated, only the knight and the believers were left lying on the ground. Some of them were still breathing and were curled up on the ground, moaning in pain. "Where are the enemies?" Brian stared at the corner of the street without blinking, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. "Didn't the enemies all fall?" The Earl was shocked and puzzled. Obviously, he did not expect that His Majesty's army was so strong. More than 10 silver-armored knights almost lost the ability to fight in the blink of an eye. "They're here," Sylvie said sternly. As if responding to her warning, a woman walked out from the corner of the street. The stone slabs on the street rolled up like a carpet and floated in the air. Concentrated gunshots rang out again, and the stone slab that had just been erected was smashed into pieces. However, there was still a piece of limestone that had completed its turn, and like a thick sword, it swept towards the crowd. "Oh no!" Brian's heart sank. Based on what he had just seen, there was no way a flintlock could accurately smash an overturned stone slab in such a short distance. He could hardly imagine the scene of the soldiers being hit. They did not even have armor, and their casualties would only be worse than the knights. But at a time like this, he could only endure it. Almost at the same time, a purple light suddenly appeared in front of the team. The magic cage completely enveloped the stone slab and quickly tightened, forcibly stopping it in its tracks. "The enemy is a witch?" Earl Delta finally reacted. The First Army did not stop shooting until all the erected stone slabs fell to the ground. The thick smoke obscured their vision, and the air was filled with the choking smell of sulfur, but no one dared to rub their eyes or cough. Except for the sound of reloading, the scene was frighteningly quiet. "Miss Sylvie?" Iron Axe asked. "The magic is gone," she said slowly. The disappearance of magic meant that the enemy had left the battlefield or was already dead. When the smoke dissipated, Brian saw the result. A woman was lying in a pool of blood. Her dark green curly hair was soaked in the blood and looked even darker. Brian let go of the Earl, who was still in shock, and walked in front of her. Her red and white priest robe revealed her identity without a doubt. There were 2 palm-sized wounds on the chest and abdomen of the pure witch, and reddish-brown blood clots were still flowing out. Probably because the bullet had penetrated the stone slab, it had directly penetrated her body. There were many scars on her arms and legs, probably caused by flying gravel. Rolling up the green stone slabs on the street as a shield, and then using the remaining stone slabs as weapons to attack the enemy. Even if the enemy had a god's stone of retaliation, it would be difficult for them to get close to her. It was a very correct method, but she did not expect the power of the flintlock. Now that he thought about it, he was afraid that in the first round of shooting, she had already been hit by the dense rain of bullets, but she still insisted on flipping a stone slab and throwing it, which showed her willpower. Is she really a witch of the church? Delta cautiously came forward. Didn't His Majesty make it very clear in the propaganda in King City? Brian replied angrily. The church not only poisons ordinary people with berserk pills, but also secretly trains witches who serve them. Those innocent women who were framed by the church are on our side. Haven't you heard anything about it? I have, but it's really unbelievable. This is nothing. The church has done many despicable things. Of course, the nobles are no better. Brian thought in his heart, but did not speak again. Edith was also shocked by this short conflict. It was the first time she saw the fighting style of the flintlock troops. From discovering the target to defeating the enemy, the whole process was like a storm, and the soldiers only needed to stand still. His Majesty's army had already gained the upper hand in terms of physical exhaustion. It was conceivable that the larger the scale of the battle, the more obvious the advantage of using flintlocks. There was no doubt that the form of war with thick armor and sharp blades had been completely changed. Thinking of the roaring machines in the western region that were constantly producing such weapons, Edith knew how terrible the war potential of His Majesty's territory was. Edith did not come to her senses until Iron Axe ordered the troops to move forward. But she was even more determined in her heart. Her choice was right. The first army turned the corner and soon arrived at the door of the church. There were already many corpses lying on the ground, and they were basically from the patrol team. The cause of the incident was quickly found out. Just as the patrol team was following orders to lock down the church, more than 200 berserkers suddenly rushed out and scattered the Thane's men. Some of the believers stayed behind to tangle with the patrol team and create chaos in the outskirts of the city, while others directly broke through the city gate. Fortunately, the first army was less than 100 meters away from the church at that time and happened to run into the pure witches. Had they been a quarter of an hour late, the pure witches would have probably escaped in the chaos. Brian led the troops into the church and quickly cleaned up the remaining resistance inside. Then it was time to loot. According to His Majesty's request, the documents, letters, and supplies of the church had to be looted completely. Under Sylvie's instructions, the soldiers blew up the heavy iron door of the basement with a small bag of explosives. When the door slowly fell down, the people present could not help but stare at it. Chapter 590. At night, the castle hall of Redwater City was brightly lit. Attendants walked through the crowd with wine glasses in their hands. Musicians plucked the strings of their instruments and sang softly. Plates of delicious food were served to the table, and goblets filled with red wine were filled. The nobles gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, chatting and laughing with wine glasses in their hands. Edith was the focus of everyone's eyes. She and Earl Delta were shuttling among the nobles and seemed to be enjoying everything. Brian, on the other hand, felt out of place in all of this. The neckline of his shirt was choking his neck, and the tight black jacket made it difficult for him to even stretch his arms. The pointy high-heeled boots on his feet were even worse. It was hard for him to understand how the nobles could wear such awkward shoes to walk on the smooth floor. Brian could not help but envy Vanner. As the guardian of the First Army, at least he did not have to suffer. However, when he thought of Edith saying that they represented His Majesty, Brian could not help but straighten his back. Suddenly, someone patted him on the shoulder. "You look uncomfortable. Is this your first time attending this kind of banquet?" He turned around and found that it was Sir Caesar. Caesar was wearing a broad-shouldered suit with a circle of white gauze around his neck. He looked very different from usual. "Relax. You don't have to be so nervous." "I'm not nervous. It's not a bad thing." Sir waved his hand. "Everyone has their own strengths. It's normal." Brian was silent for a moment. "Where's Sir Ironax?" "He's playing the role of a flower protector." Caesar pointed to the other side of the hall. "Iffy and Miss Sylvie are as popular as Miss Edith." Brian looked in the direction he was pointing at. Although the dresses they were wearing were given by Edith at the last minute, and their expressions were very stiff, in terms of appearance, they were even more beautiful than the Pearl of the Northern region. "Those people just don't know that they're witches, and Lord Ironaxe isn't protecting the witches," said Brian. "Oh," said Sir John, shaking his whiskers, "is that so?" "To be precise, he's protecting the nobles." Brian nodded. "If Miss Iffy gets angry, the people around her will suffer." The two of them looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "Look, you look much more natural now." Brian was taken aback for a moment before he realized what was going on. "Thank you." "You're welcome." The old man beckoned for a waiter, picked up a glass of wine, and looked at him. "Would you like a glass?" "No. His Majesty said that soldiers are not allowed to drink alcohol during a mission." "Not even during rest time?" "This is the rule." "Well," he said, drinking alone. "That's a pity." "Do you think?" Brian hesitated and asked, "What Miss Edith said is true? For example?" "The knight represents His Majesty when he's outside. Out of courtesy, I shouldn't reject such an invitation." "Something like that?" Sir nodded. Brian suddenly felt a little depressed. "I may not be suitable to be a knight. I can't be as relaxed and natural as she is on such occasions." "That's normal." Sir shrugged. "Some people are born to be good at it. An outstanding knight at a banquet can indeed bring praise to the Lord, and even facilitate diplomacy. But it's not all a knight is. In fact, my son is very bad at social activities among the nobles." "You mean, the light of dawn?" "He rarely interacts with other nobles and is often absent from the Lord's invitation. But no one can deny that he's an outstanding knight." "I didn't know that Mr. Philin has such a side," Brian said in surprise. "There's a lot you don't know," Sir Schilt said with a smile. "He's as stubborn as a stone. He even married a commoner in the theater. I was so angry that I even broke off contact with him. But later I found I was wrong. Ms. Irene is a perfect wife. She's not much worse than other noble ladies, except that she doesn't have a noble title." It was hard for them to persist during that time. At this point he changed the topic. "I heard that you once fought against the rebels to protect the provisions of Border Town?" "It was Lady Nightingale who really stopped them," Brian replied with some embarrassment. "If it weren't for her, I'm afraid I would have died in the basement." "But at least you stood up, didn't you? You're braver than most nobles." "Many nobles have the title of knight, but they flee at the sight of the enemy. I think the reason why His Majesty is willing to make you a knight is definitely not because of your social skills. As long as you stick to what you're best at, you'll be a qualified knight." "I see." Brian could not help feeling touched. "Thank you for telling me this." "It's okay. Just take it as a chat between the two of us," Sir said, stroking his beard. "When I see you, I can't help but think of Philin, so I can't help but talk a little more." After a while, Brian asked in a low voice, "What about the other thing Miss Edith said?" "She said that the communication between nobles is boring and uninteresting." "You really care about her?" The old man looked at him with great interest. "Is it possible that—" No. I'm just curious." Brian quickly waved his hand. You didn't think much of it when you looked at her, but now you seem to be enjoying it. Well, Sir smacked his lips. How should I put it? Some people can handle everything properly even if they don't like it. I think Miss Edith may be one of the best. She can handle everything well even if she doesn't like it. That's not unusual. Sir Caesar shrugged. They're talented and good at many things, but it doesn't mean they like everything. Moreover, she's the daughter of a duke. This kind of communication should be an instinct for her. His Majesty must really need someone like her, Brian sighed. Chapter 591. A storm was brewing in the sea east of the Fjords Islands. The gray clouds were very low, and lightning flashed through them from time to time. The dull thunder seemed to come from far away, like the angry roar of the gods. Heidi Morgan's mood was as bad as the weather. It had been more than 2 months since she sent Iffy and Softfeathers out, but there was still no news from them, which made no sense. It might be difficult to send messages because of the long distance between the two places, but as far as she knew, Honey was also in the western region of Grey Castle. All she needed to do was threaten the little guy and snatch an animal messenger. Could it be that something had happened to the territory of that lord? Heidi closed the window irritably to shut out the roaring sea wind. Recently, the situation on Sleeping Island had become more and more unfavorable for her. Since Tilly opened the sleeping spell, the non-combat witches had been on her side, and it had been proved that the Fjords people really needed assistant witches more than combat witches. After all, there were not many enemies on this island, and the Chamber of Commerce mainly hired witches for business or to open up waterways. As a result, the status of this group of weak witches rose steadily, and they had a tendency to compete with the combat witches. There were also common people. Damn it, why didn't I think of this at the beginning? Heidi thought bitterly. There were only 2 factions on the island, and as long as she always spoke on behalf of the combat witches, she would not be much weaker than Tilly. But now, more and more ordinary islanders moved here, and the forces gradually became 3 factions. Influenced by the Chamber of Commerce, the latter almost only recognized Tilly, which could be seen from the fact that she had to leave the island every few days. Especially after gaining the support of Thunder, she had become a VIP on other islands. Thinking of this, she would feel an inexplicable anger in her heart. Building a good relationship with the common people and promoting integration? This is simply a trick to strengthen my own power. Tilly has deceived everyone. She is selling the home of witches to the common people. If this goes on, I will never be able to replace Tilly Wimbledon. It was the first time that Heidi had no idea what to do with a young girl in her 20s. Her desire to entice the combat witch to leave Sleeping Island grew stronger. Just when she was about to go to Camilla, the butler of Sleeping Island, to ask when she could let the charming beauty go to the western region again, the door was suddenly pushed open. "My lord, it's bad." Skyflame rushed in and said anxiously. What happened? As her right-hand man who had been with her for the longest time, Skyflare rarely showed such a flustered expression, which made Heidi feel a little strange. "There's a new witch on Sleeping Island. I heard that her name is Annie." "So what?" Heidi was confused. Ever since the merchants spread the news of Sleeping Island, it was not uncommon for wild witches to come to them from time to time. "She's from the kingdom of Wolfheart," Skyflare said in a low voice. "I've seen her before." A clap of thunder suddenly resounded in the sky. Heidi's heart could not help but tremble. She soon realized what Zhang Hing meant by bad news. "You mean, she's a failed candidate rejected by the Bloodfang Association? That's impossible. Could it be just the same name? I thought so at first, so I hid in the crowd and peeked at her. Although she was carried into the Summer Palace, she did look very similar to Annie from a few years ago." "Are you sure?" "My lord, I'm not sure about other witches, but Annie is different. She had a partner, who is now Iffy with her." Skyflare gritted her teeth and said, "Iffy cried all the way and asked to go back because of this, so I remembered her appearance. How could this happen? Shouldn't they all be?" Heidi grabbed Skyflare's collar and asked, "Did you let her go?" "No, my lord, I did what you asked me to do." Skyflare defended herself. Please believe me, I'll never betray you. Heidi stared into her eyes for a while and then slowly let go of her. You just said that she was carried into the summer palace. What happened? She seems to have contracted the cold plague, and it's quite serious. Skyflare took a breath and said, someone has already sent for Della. Della's ability could cut off the pain and restore peace, but it could not cure the cold plague. Heidi walked back and forth in the room for a while and asked, Tilly isn't on the island, is she? Yes, she went to Twin Dragon Island 2 days ago. It seems that she's busy with the sea exploration. Heidi stopped and said, summon Nightfall and ask Shaji to inquire about the situation. She hasn't seen Annie before, so she's not afraid of being recognized. It was raining heavily, and the heavy rain hit the window with a pitter-patter. Heidi sat at the table without saying a word, while Skyflare and Nightfall stood quietly beside her, waiting for her next order. The atmosphere in the room was quite gloomy for a while. Suddenly, there was a rush of footsteps outside the room. The door was opened and closed. Shaji, who had just returned, leaned against the door, took off her wet raincoat and straw hat, and let out a long sigh. The witch called Annie has fallen asleep, but Della said that her condition is not ideal. The cold plague has already damaged her lungs, and it should be more than 1 or 2 days before the outbreak. Really? Heidi's voice was terrifyingly gloomy. What's Camilla going to do? She said that there's a witch in the western region of Grey Castle who can cure any disease. She'll send Annie to the western region when the rain stops. Heidi was so angry that she wanted to laugh. Hiring One-Eyed Jack to go back and forth to the fjords cost nearly 100 golden dragon coins, and Camilla always refused when she asked to go to Grey Castle or other islands. Now, Camilla sent the charming beauty for a useless, strange witch? Moreover, if she let Annie go to the western region and meet up with Iffy, what she had done would be exposed, which was absolutely intolerable. No matter what, she had to keep Annie on the island. Heidi suppressed her anger and looked at Nightfall. You should be able to make her fall asleep completely, right? You mean, with the seed of peaceful rest? Nightfall was startled. Yes, I can, but why do you? Because she's a traitor of the Bloodfang Association. Heidi interrupted impatiently. You don't need to know the details. You just need to know that she's unforgivable. Is she also a combat witch? Nightfall was a little confused. Why don't we wait for Tilly to come back before we make a decision? If someone finds out, we'll be in trouble. The traitor of the Bloodfang Association should be dealt with by the Bloodfang Association. Heidi squinted her eyes. And if we hand her over to Tilly, will that naive little girl punish her? Why, do you want to go against my decision? Chapter 592. Damn it, these witches are starting to lose their minds. Heidi thought angrily. When they were still on Archduke Island, they would not have bothered to ask why. As long as one was an enemy of the Bloodfang Association, he or she would die. The environment could affect a person the most. Ferocious and cunning rock wolves were born in the mountains and cliffs, while stupid and incompetent dogs were bred in the kennels. The assistant witches brought a large amount of golden dragon and resources to the island through the sleeping spell, which gradually turned the island into a safe playground. Even the combat witches began to believe Tilly's lies. Heidi obviously did not have much time left. You can control the time when the seed will take effect, right? Good. Don't let it take effect immediately after planting it. Wait until Annie is transported to the charming beauty, then quietly send her on her way. Heidi nodded and said, Now, let's go visit this former traitor. If Annie died of cold plague on the ship, the crew would definitely throw her body into the sea to avoid infection. In this way, no one could find out the truth. Do it in the daytime? Nightfall asked in surprise. It will only be more suspicious at night, and Camilla may not let me go to the palace. Heidi glanced at her. Shaji happened to hear that a witch from the Kingdom of Wolfheart is in a coma. As the representative of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, isn't it normal for the Bloodfang Association to visit her? You're right, madam. Skyflare pulled up the hood behind her robe. Even if we don't go, once something happens to her, Tilly and Camilla will still suspect us. Heidi put on a raincoat and opened the door. The strong wind and rainwater immediately rushed into the room. She waved to the two behind her and walked into the rainstorm. She had made up her mind. When the three of them walked into the palace yard, Camilla Derry, who was on duty, immediately appeared at the door. I heard from Shah-Ji that a new witch from the kingdom of Wolfheart came to the island. Heidi Morgan shrugged. It said that she's in a bad condition. We're here to see her. Annie has fallen asleep under Della's comfort. I think it's better for you not to disturb her. I just want to have a look because the name sounds so familiar. Maybe she has been to the Bloodfang Association but was separated from us when we escaped from Archduke Island. Camilla hesitated. Alright, please come in. Heidi's patience had been exhausted by the short conversation. How could an ordinary witch treat this place as her own territory? Was she the chief butler of Sleeping Island? She sneered inwardly. It was just a dog under Tilly. If it wasn't for the last sentence, please come in, she planned to make the other party suffer a little. Since most residences on Sleeping Island rose from the ground by relying on lotuses, there were few buildings with more than one floor. Tilly's palace was no exception. Through the long corridor to the side room, Camilla turned sideways and said, "She's in there." Heidi walked into the house eagerly, then nodded at Skyflare. The latter carefully looked at the woman on the bed who had her eyes tightly shut and nodded in a barely noticeable manner. Who sent her here? Heidi walked up to Camilla and asked in a low voice. It seemed that she was concerned about Camilla, but in fact, she just wanted to block the chief butler's sight. As long as Nightfall was given enough time, she could implant the seed of peaceful rest into Annie's body. Camilla did not answer, but showed a strange expression. Why did you kill her? Heidi could not help but be startled. Before she could react, Nightfall behind her screamed, "This witch is fake." She turned her head abruptly, only to see that the person on the bed had disappeared, leaving only a small pitch-black ball formed by magic floating in the air. The seed of peaceful rest. How could you do it? Camilla shook her head and said, I thought you were just speaking up for the combat witches. I didn't expect you to be a cruel murderer. Shut up. Heidi could no longer hold back her anger. She threw her deadly magic power at Nightfall, but the moment she was hit, her figure disappeared into a cloud of white mist. Heidi finally understood everything. Shadow. She gnashed her teeth and said, Get out here. Hurried footsteps were heard in the corridor. Apparently, the witch hiding in the dark was trying to escape. Skyflare catch her? Yes. The latter rushed out of the side room, sucked in a deep breath, and breathed out raging flames. The scorching flames seemed to have a mind of their own. They crawled along the walls and chased after the fleeing person. Along the way, they burned the door frames and windows black. A scream came from afar. Madam, we have to get out of here as soon as possible. Nightfall said anxiously, They lied to you. This is a trap. Leave through the window. Although Heidi had vented her hatred by hearing Shadow's cry, she also knew that they should not stay here for long. However, she did not understand how Tilly knew about the Bloodfang Association's affairs several years ago. The three of them suddenly stopped when they got out of the palace. In the heavy rain, a black-haired woman appeared in the garden. Her eyes were like golden stars, which could be seen clearly in the rain. She was not carrying any weapons, but just standing there made them feel great pressure. It was the extraordinary witch, Ashes. She usually stayed with Tilly Wimbledon. Heidi turned her head and saw two other familiar figures at the gate of the palace. Andrea and the Shadow. Especially Nightfall, who was making faces at them as if nothing had happened. Apparently, the scream just now was also fake. If both of them were here, it could only mean that Tilly had not left Sleeping Island at all. Heidi's heart completely sank. You don't have to explain anything. If you surrender now, I won't kill you, Ashes said word by word. No one thought she was bragging. As an extraordinary, as long as she wore a god's stone of retaliation, she would be the natural enemy of all witches. If it were not for her, Heidi would not have been able to endure until today. But there was still a chance. The breakthrough point was at the gate of the palace. As long as she could control the two witches, She might be able to threaten Ashes. Without hesitation, she grabbed Nightfall and rushed to the front gate of the palace. Skyflare, stop Ashes. As a combat witch, when her ability did not work, daggers and crossbows were the best weapons. Skyflare pulled out her dagger and rushed to Ashes. Nightfall also understood her intention and summoned the seed of symbiosis in her hand. A threat without deterrence was useless. Heidi had decided to kill one of them and keep the other as a hostage. Her first target was naturally Shadow, who had mocked them for a long time. Then Andrea calmly raised the long iron stick in her hand. What was that? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, a loud boom caused her body to become completely paralyzed. Chapter 593. Heidi stumbled and fell into the rain. The water splashed into her mouth, nose, and collar. It was an indescribable feeling. She did not feel any severe pain, but she could not muster up any strength. Don't worry about me. Go and kill her. Heidi shouted hoarsely without checking her injuries. But Nightfall's reaction disappointed her. The combat witch of the Bloodfang Association hesitated and stopped. Finally, she returned to Heidi's side and asked, "Are you okay?" "Idiot. Only by restraining them can I turn the situation around. What's the use even if I'm not injured?" Heidi wanted to vent her anger, but she did not even have the strength to open her mouth. Skyflare's painful cry came from behind her, and then the sound of fighting subsided. It was not easy for Heidi to hold on for a few breaths in the face of the extraordinary Ashes. The numbness gradually subsided, and she felt a burning sensation in her thigh, which was especially obvious under the rain. Heidi struggled to raise her head and saw Andrea slowly walking to her. "Do you still want to resist?" "No." Nightfall answered. She turned around and knelt down. "I surrender. Please don't kill Lady Heidi. If I wanted to kill her, her head would have been blown off." Andrea wiped the rain off her forehead. "I'm keeping her alive now because Her Highness Tilly still hasn't figured out something. When the evidence is conclusive, she'll get the punishment she deserves." "Evidence?" Nightfall said blankly. "Annie betrayed the witches of the Bloodfang Association. That's why Her Highness killed her." "Is that what she said to you?" "As far as I know, Annie has never joined the Bloodfang Association." Andrea shrugged. "Anyway, when all the facts are revealed, you'll know what kind of person Heidi Morgan is." Then she turned around and shouted at Shadow, "Go get Pandora. If she doesn't stop the bleeding, she'll die." At this moment, Heidi finally felt the pain. She could not move her leg at all, as if there was a heavy object that did not belong to her. Wave after wave of pain replaced the scorching heat, and at the same time, she recovered a little bit of her spirit. It was over. She knew exactly what was going to happen next. Since Tilly dared to do this, she must have known something about him. As long as there were clues, it would not be difficult for the witches to find out the truth. Even if the witches of Sleeping Island could not do it, there were still the witches of the Western region. The problem lay with Iffy and Softfeathers. She had underestimated that silly girl, Tilly. As Andrea turned around, Heidi gritted her teeth and released her magic with the last of her strength. Within a range of 10 steps, her ability could make hollow objects collapse from the inside, regardless of whether they were living things or containers. She called it crushing power. Defeat was a foregone conclusion, but Heidi did not want to let Tilly win so easily. At least she wanted to teach that guy an unforgettable lesson. "No, my lord," Nightfall exclaimed when he noticed her actions. Too late. She laughed maliciously in her heart. However, the ability did not take effect. The moment she made her move, an invisible barrier dispersed her crushing power. "You are wearing a god's stone of retaliation," Heidi said with her eyes wide open. "Wait, the thing that hurt me was not Tilly's new ability?" "Unrepentant. It seems that you're still full of energy." Andrea showed a disgusted look, raised the iron bar and smashed it down. Heidi only felt a buzzing sound in her head, and then she fell into darkness. "That's it?" Andrea looked at Heidi Morgan and Skyflare, who were being carried away, and asked, "How's the situation on your side?" "Not bad, but Skyflare may not be able to hold on until we reach the Western region." Why did you hit them so hard? Andrea showed a look of disgust. Didn't Lady Tilly say to keep them alive as much as possible? I didn't expect that she would choose to fight with her life on the line, and her skills are not bad. Ashes licked the rainwater from the corner of her mouth. It's not impossible to capture her alive, but I'm worried that you'll make a mistake at the critical moment, so I had to end the battle quickly. Andrea was angry for a moment. That's how it is. If you had shown them the glass beads earlier, maybe they wouldn't have chosen to fight with their lives on the line. The extraordinary side. They just had to hold on to the flintlock. How would they know what it is? Stop arguing. Lady Tilly is still waiting for your report, Shadow reminded helplessly. And even if you want to argue, don't stand in the rain. What if you really catch a cold? The two looked at each other for a moment, then rolled their eyes at each other before ending the argument and returning to the palace side by side. After reporting what had happened to Tilly, Andrea noticed that Tilly's expression was not very good. She was not as relaxed or comfortable as if she had solved a big problem, but rather felt a little uncomfortable. What's wrong? Ashes held her hand. Are you not feeling well? Tilly shook her head. When I first saw Roland's secret letter, I actually didn't want to believe its contents. Her tone sounded quite sad. It's not easy for us witches to have our own home. Why would we want to repeat the tragedy of the past? Isn't it better to live peacefully here? You've done a good job, Ashes comforted her. Not all combat witches will unconditionally agree with Heidi's way of doing things, especially after their lives have improved. Some combat witches have sided with us, including the members of the Bloodfang Association. She's right. Andrea did not like Ashes, but she did not want to see Tilly sad at this time. The fact that Nightfall didn't listen to Heidi's order to resist desperately is also proof. As long as we have enough time, everyone will stick together, just like the Witch Union. I hope so. Tilly took a deep breath. Since Heidi has done this, I can't indulge her anymore. But according to Iffy, most of the witches of the Bloodfang Association don't know about this. Later, I'll ask Camilla to gather them. As long as they are willing to stay here and wait for the result, don't treat them as enemies. Andrea nodded. It was not easy for Sleeping Island to become lively again. No one wanted these witches to be separated. Once the storm passes, we'll take Heidi to the western region, Andrea continued. Are we going to fight against the church? Ashes's voice became excited. Yes. Tilly closed her eyes and said in a low voice, we'll fight against the Judgment Army, the God's Punishment Army, the Pure Witches, and even the Divine Will. As Roland said in the letter, if we can completely defeat the church, the witches will truly be liberated. Even if he's not my brother, I should still help him, because that's also helping myself. She paused for a moment. Are you willing to go with me? Of course, Ashes replied without hesitation. I'll always be with you. Chapter 594. Roland was sitting in his office, listening to the information from the front line. 09 Smaltseichnet, Silver. Hiss. Light City has lowered the drawbridge. Hiss. We're entering the church. Hiss. Got it? Be careful, Nightingale replied. It seems that this is the limit. Roland spread out the map and drew a circle around Silver City. If we want to directly contact the eastern and northern regions, we have to set up a transfer station here. Ever since he got the sigil of listening, he had been addicted to the feeling of knowing what was happening in the distance like the back of his hand. The high-speed information exchange made him feel like he had returned to the previous era. At this moment, he felt like he was sitting in the command hall, monitoring every step of the development of the entire battle situation. Unfortunately, the sigil of listening could not transmit indefinitely. Just like the tracking sigil, once it exceeded a certain range, its pointing ability would be greatly weakened. If the distance between two magic stones was too far, the sound could not be guaranteed to be clear and stable. Now it seemed that at least one transfer station was needed before the order from Neverwinter could be issued to the whole country. And the number of sigil is not enough. Nightingale held a piece of dried fish in her mouth. You only made a total of 4 pairs. You used up half of them just for the tooth extraction operation. It won't be easy to catch another demon. This problem did exist. The sigil could only transmit sound in one direction. To achieve the effect of instant communication, the witches needed at least 2 sets of sigil. However, compared to flying messengers or manual delivery, the sigil was already considered extremely efficient. Of course, it was not impossible to improve the sigil. According to Agatha, the quality of the sigil of listening was determined by the magic power of the fusion blood. For example, the sigil of listening made by Anna had a better communication effect. With the addition of the blood of a senior demon, the sigil of listening could probably cover the entire kingdom of Grey Castle. Hiss, something's wrong. Wait. Sylvie's intermittent voice sounded again. Her words suddenly made the 2 people at the table feel refreshed. Another pure witch? Nightingale swallowed a piece of dried fish. Or a moving magic black hole. The former was easy to deal with, as they could directly locate and fire, but the latter had 2 possibilities. One was a believer wearing a god's stone, and the other was a god's punishment army that was born not afraid of magic. But I didn't see any reaction from the god's stone. No god's stones? Roland frowned. No, there's nothing in the church. The voice paused for a moment. The basement was empty. Both of them looked at each other. The church had escaped. It's not impossible. After a while, Roland said in annoyance, I was too cautious. There was no one in the kingdom who could stop the advance of the first army, and the nobles were not willing to take the initiative to run into the muzzle of the first army, but it did not mean that the fence-sitters among them would not secretly report to the church. It was normal for the church to evacuate the city with the supplies when it was absolutely impossible for them to win. Unlike the seizure of Longsong Stronghold and Fallen Dragon Ridge, the nobles who had not been destroyed had probably watched the whole plundering operation. It was estimated that shortly after the attack on Redwater City, the churches in other cities had received the news that Prince Roland is searching for God's stones of retaliation. If they had divided their forces at the beginning and sent 3 teams to attack the 3 cities at the same time, they might have been able to catch them all. You can't say that. Nightingale handed a piece of dried fish to Roland. After all, Sylvie is the only one who can see through the enemy's ambush. If they encounter a difficult pure witch, the scattered army is likely to suffer heavy losses. It's good to be cautious. Roland was slightly startled and took a bite of the dried fish. You're quite good at comforting people now. She smiled slyly. How do you feel? Do you feel better? If you're still not happy, I'll massage your shoulders again. Vendi taught me a technique that is said to be very comfortable. Vendi can even do this. She knows a lot of things. Nightingale raised her eyebrows. When the Witch Cooperation Association was trekking and suffered all kinds of hardships, she was the one who stabilized the team. Otherwise, with Kara's strange temper, she would have driven everyone away long ago. When it comes to taking care of sisters, no one is better than her. Roland touched his chin for a while. At present, there were no government affairs to deal with. The First Army had successfully entered Silver City. It was better to relax for a while. When he was about to respond, the magic stone in Nightingale's arms rang again. This time, the sound was very clear, as if it was shouting in his ear. This is lightning. I repeat, this is lightning. Please answer if you can hear me. The witches did not have many recreational activities, so Roland would occasionally tell them some novel stories in the science class. In addition to increasing their interest in learning, he could also increase their knowledge. Ever since she had heard him talk about the pilot who had conquered the sky, Lightning had immediately fallen in love with his unique way of talking. But in Roland's ears, this kind of conversation was very embarrassing. After Nightingale activated another group of magic stones, he coughed twice. You say it. I can hear you. The red mist behind the snow mountain has disappeared. No, it's disappearing. What? Both of them asked at the same time. Are you sure? Absolutely. Maggie is also here. You can ask her. The mist has indeed become much thinner. Coo. No, you should say this is Maggie first, then report the content. Coo. Where are you now? Don't get too close to Devil's Town. Come back quickly. Roland was afraid that the little girl's adventurous spirit would explode and she would directly fly into the camp to investigate. If another senior demon appeared, they would be doomed. Lightning understands. Fortunately, she quickly replied. Go and find Agatha, Roland said to Nightingale. Maybe only she knows what's going on. Since he killed the magic slayer, he had been paying attention to the movements behind the snow mountain. The coal transport fleet heading to the source of the Redwater River was divided into 4 or 5 batches, each with an animal messenger. In addition, Lightning and Maggie's practice range was set to the line between the snow mountain and the misty forest, in order to deal with the demons' sudden attack. However, not only did the demons not retaliate, even the red mist began to dissipate. Agatha soon arrived at the office, but after carefully listening to Lightning's report, she was also a little confused. The Union rarely has the opportunity to get close to the Devil's camp, so I've never heard of such a situation. Even in the decades of war, I've never seen them retreat, Agatha said with a frown. In that case, continue to observe, Roland finally decided. Maybe the red mist is only weakening temporarily. It's better to be cautious. He did not want to lose any witches at this time. Chapter 595. After confirming that there were no traces of demons in the camp, a new reconnaissance team was quickly formed. Maggie set off first with Agatha on her back to search the camp. The 50 soldiers of the First Army escorted Soroya, Summer, and the others, who lacked the ability to escape, to find out why the red mist had disappeared. We're almost there. Lightning gestured to Maggie. Descend. Agatha craned her neck and saw the rocky beach gradually appearing in front of her. Just as the little girl had said, the thick red mist had disappeared without a trace, revealing the dark brown earth. Unlike the dark green forest around, there was not a single tree in the camp, as if the ground had been torn off. This was the first time she had been so close to the demon's residence. As a former member of the Quest Society, Agatha could not help but feel a little excited. Lightning is about to land. I repeat, lightning is about to land. Be careful. If you encounter any possible danger, remember to escape immediately. Roland's voice came from the other side of the magic stone. Lightning understands. Maggie folded her wings and dived toward the ground. The scenery under her feet changed continuously, from the blue sea to the gray rugged stone walls, and finally to the moist brown land. Agatha felt her whole body shake, and the huge devil beast landed steadily on the ground. Demons live in a place like this? Lightning was amazed. I didn't notice it when I looked down from the sky, but now it's really weird. Agatha had the same feeling. Dark stone towers stood everywhere on the empty land, like a black forest in a picturesque disorder. The black spots from the sky were basically from these alien buildings. The tall ones were about 3 or 4 stories high, and the short ones barely above their heads. In terms of density, they were far more densely packed than those in the frontline camps. It seemed that these stone towers had other functions besides storing the red mist. Although I don't know what happened to them, it shouldn't be too far from now, she judged. Why do you say that? Lightning asked curiously. Because the stone towers haven't completely withered. Agatha pointed to the nearest black stone tower. Only the surface of these towers has darkened, but they're still far from being rough and fragile. This is completely different from the barren land left behind by the Union after they seized the frontline camp. It can only mean that the demons didn't plan to retreat or they made a very hasty decision. She paused and said, "Let's go to the center of the campsite first. It's the tower where I Devil is staying. Maybe we can find something. I hope Asya can find out the reason." Lightning, who was walking in front, suddenly screamed and instantly sank into the ground. Maggie was so scared that she immediately turned into a pigeon and flew into the sky. Agatha also summoned ice and stood in front of her. "I'm fine." Before the two of them could react, the little girl flew out of the hole again. She patted the dirt off her body and complained, "Who dug a pit here to harm people?" Agatha let out a sigh of relief and was about to dispel the ice wall. However, what Maggie said next made her heart jump again. "Hey, There's a demon in here. Yeah, Maggie landed on her head. But it seems to be dead. I think so. The little girl patted her chest and said with a lingering fear, otherwise, I'd be in trouble. Agatha held the ice spear in her hand and moved closer to take a look. Just as Maggie said, a mad demon was standing in the pit with its head drooped. Its exposed skin had shrunk and curled like a salted fish in the sun. I remember Sylvie once said that these demons usually hide underground, right? She further confirmed her judgment. Whether they decided to retreat at that time or encountered some other accident, it must have been very sudden. Otherwise, these demons would not have waited for a new order until they died and used up the red mist bit by bit underground. Then we'd better fly to find it, Lightning muttered. I don't want to fall into a pit again. She carried Agatha on her back and walked slowly on the ground. After the three bypassed several rows of stone towers, the view in front of them suddenly became clear. There was an open space in the camp. This is... Agatha gasped. From the scene at the scene, it was obvious that the demons had not deliberately left this open space. There was a huge hole in the center of the open space, which was about the size of the square of Border Town, and many fragments of the stone tower were scattered around it. The three of them stood at the mouth of the hole and looked down. The hole was so deep that it was difficult to see where it led. It's just like the place where I found you. Lightning smacked her lips. Do you want me to go down and have a look first? Don't go. No, Coo. Agatha and Maggie stopped her at the same time. All right. The little girl sighed and showed a regretful look. Since His Majesty punished her to do test questions, her adventurous spirit had been restrained a lot. Then let's walk around first. The rest of the camp was almost the same. Of course, the three of them did find something. Maggie found a lot of magic stones in a stone tower with a flat roof and a dead chaos beast. At that time, she just wanted to stop on the stone tower to rest, but she did not expect to find a narrow entrance to the courtyard, which was probably used by the demons to inject the red mist. 2 days later, the first army also arrived at the rocky beach. Lotus found a narrow crack in the mountain and cut a path on the cliff that was only wide enough for one person to walk through. The heavy machine guns and other equipment had to be transported by Maggie, and it took a lot of effort for the 50 soldiers and witches to enter the inland. This was also the first contact between the Aborigines and the aliens. Even the most determined soldiers felt fear and panic when they saw the incredible scene in front of them. Roland had already expected this. He ordered them to camp near the entrance of the cliff so that they would not be too nervous. As for Summer's playback work, Roland simply did not let the first army participate. According to Agatha's deduction, the time when the camp tower disappeared should be 1.5 to 1 month ago. If the playback time exceeded 1 week, Summer's magic power would be consumed rapidly. As for the incident that happened 1 month ago, he could only replay it once a day. There was no shortcut, so they could only try it slowly. Among the large pile of magic stones that Maggie brought back, there were many practical ones. Although the quality was far inferior to the ones obtained from the fearsome demon, it was better than nothing. It could be said that the Sorcerer Tower, which was about to be completed, only lacked a living demon. It was a long process to find out the exact time of the incident. While waiting for the result and developing new gadgets, Roland received the second secret letter from the fjords. Chapter 596. This was an unexpected surprise. Roland originally thought that she would send several combat witches to help, but he did not expect that she would come in person, which meant that the trouble on the island had been solved, or that it would not threaten the stability of Sleeping Island for the time being. The next day after receiving the letter, Roland took Anna and the others to the shallow beach to welcome Tilly. After half a month of construction, there were many traces of artificial carvings on the muddy beach. Simple wooden houses and sheds stood around the ramp, which would be the prototype of the warehouse and the sailors' dormitory. In order to prevent the corrosion of the sea wind, the windward side of the wooden houses was painted with an orange coating, which was both eye-catching and beautiful. A section of the beach, about 30 meters long, was flattened by Lotus, and bricks were stacked around the periphery, which served as a temporary dock. Since this was a natural deep-water port, they did not even need a trestle. Even a three-masted ship could directly dock at the edge. It was the first time for most of the witches to see the shallow beach in the development stage, so they looked around curiously. Is that the big pit over there, the dock that collapsed before? Anna walked to Roland and pointed to a group of busy workers in the distance. What are they doing now? You also heard about it. Roland was a little embarrassed. Of course. Nana told me that day that 3 workers had their legs broken. This and the deflagration during the coke oven test were the 2 most serious accidents in the border area in the new year. The latter could be said to be the price that had to be paid during the exploration, while the former was at least half of the responsibility caused by Roland's carelessness. Considering that the soil in the shallow beach was relatively soft, the Minister of Construction, Carr, had suggested that it might be safer to build a dock on the edge of the mountain, but Roland immediately rejected the idea. The main reason was the construction period. It took so long to sink a long slope, and if they sunk a dock in the old way, it would probably be delayed until next year before they could start building Thunder's steam ship. As for the situation of the loose sand, Roland thought that there was no need to worry too much. He just needed to let Lotus draw the outline of the dock and then pour concrete to form a wall. The project went smoothly at the beginning. Just as he expected, after the concrete solidified, the walls looked quite solid, as if a stone wall had been added to the foundation. Because of this, Roland even felt complacent for a while, thinking that a civil engineer was only SOS. In the end, an accident happened when he was installing the iron gate. After the arm-thick metal door broke free from the hummingbird's grip, it suddenly collapsed together with the concrete walls on both sides, smashing the workers below. Although Hummingbird had made the door as light as a goose feather, the 3 people who had been crushed were still seriously injured. If not for Nana's timely treatment, these people would not have survived. Later, the investigation found that when the concrete wall was first filled, some of the sand collapsed under the trampling of the workers and filled the bottom, causing the wall to not be tightly connected to the floor. The seemingly flat and solid concrete enclosure on the outside was only a thin layer at the joint of the wall foot. When the iron gate was hung on such a wall, its weight instantly exceeded the limit of the steel bar, and the consequences could naturally be imagined. In the future, this would definitely be regarded as a serious mistake, but in this era, casualties during construction were a common situation, so no one would take it seriously, let alone criticize the Lord himself. Only Roland himself could feel the guilt. He cleared his throat and collected his thoughts. They are making a wooden retaining wall. To reinforce the soil on both sides of the dock? Anna quickly guessed the answer. Yes, just like the roots of a tree. Intersecting them into the ground can increase the friction between the sand, so that the side wall will not collapse easily. Roland nodded. Moreover, with the previous lesson, when filling the concrete again, he would definitely carefully check whether there was any residual sand inside the formwork. Look, a ship is coming! Mystery Moon suddenly shouted. Everyone looked toward the horizon and saw a sailing ship with a pink flag slowly sailing towards them. There was no doubt that the only ship that would bypass the southernmost corner and go to the hinterland of the western region was the charming beauty of Sleeping Island. After the ship approached the shoal, it wandered for a while before it adjusted its direction and approached the shore. Obviously, it did not expect the shoal to become like this. Roland met Tilly Wimbledon again, the 5th princess of Grey Castle. He held out his right hand to her, and the 2 smiled and shook hands. Although they had not seen each other for several months, her expression was as if they had just parted yesterday, and she did not feel strange at all. From her eyes, Roland could see that she felt the same way about him. This is a good reunion, he thought. The other witches were not so reserved. Honey, Candle, and Evelyn came up and hugged their former friends warmly. Andrea put her arm around Nightingale's shoulder, completely losing her aristocratic demeanor. Vendi held Ashes's hand and asked about her recent situation with concern. Softfeathers was surprised to find that there was a witch of the Bloodfang Association among them. Why are you here? Softfeathers frowned and walked to a witch with a pale face. Did Heidi Morgan throw you here because she couldn't wait for Mai and Iffy's reply? No, Lady Heidi is on the ship. The witch shook her head. What, Softfeathers' exclamation instantly attracted everyone's attention. You mean, she also came to the western region? It was not difficult to hear the strong fear in the little girl's voice. Who's Heidi? She seems to be the leader of the Bloodfang Association? I think Iffy mentioned her. What's she doing here? Roland looked at Tilly and asked, have you dealt with her? If you mean the uniform, you can say that the plan was very successful, and Heidi did attack Annie's illusion. Tilly spread out her hands and said, but she refused to reveal the whereabouts of the witches who were rejected by the Bloodfang Association. She also said that she would only tell you after seeing you. See me? Roland was stunned. Yes, I guess she regards you as her last hope. Tilly blinked. As the ruler of the Kingdom of Grey Castle and the representative of the secular nobles, as long as she can offer enough benefits, she should be spared and even helped to regain her position as the ruler of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, probably. Are you deliberately reminding me? He could not help laughing. He had to admit that when Tilly pretended to be careless and beat around the bush, she looked quite cute. Don't worry. If I would weigh a witch's life with benefits, you wouldn't have brought her here. By the way, who's that witch? I don't think I've seen her before. Chapter 597. Was she injured during the arrest? Yes, she was shot in the leg. Although the bleeding has been stopped, she probably can't walk anymore. Are the others all right? There was also a witch from the Bloodfang Association called Skyflare. She died that night. Tilly sighed. Our people didn't suffer any injuries. Roland nodded. I'll ask Nana to cure her. Let's talk about the rest after we return to the castle. Compared with interrogating the leader of the Bloodfang Association, the church's invasion of Grey Castle was the top priority. After returning to the office, he first inquired about the situation on Sleeping Island, and then handed the letter from the northern region to Tilly and the others for them to read. Since it involved the three big families of the king's city of the Kingdom of Dawn, Ashes and Andrea were asked to stay behind. After receiving the warning letter, Roland contacted the spy from the city of Glow, Hill Fox, twice and finally got a general idea of what had happened. After he told them all the information, Andrea could not help but shake her head. Otto is such a fool. He's still the same as when he was young. If I didn't encourage Oro to go with him, he would never dare to enter the palace alone. At least he let us know the church's movements in advance. Ashes shrugged. And a large part of the reason is because of you. Did you reply to him? Tilly asked. I advised him not to act rashly. If that witch could really ignore the god's stone of retaliation, it would be very difficult for ordinary people to control her. Not to mention that Prince Appin also talked about Scourge. Roland poured a cup of tea for everyone. Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn are too far away, so I can't give him direct help. Therefore, it's a wise choice to hide the secret for the time being and wait for the church to focus all its attention on Grey Castle. He may not be able to control himself. Andrea frowned. Otto Luashi has been impulsive since he was a child. He will listen to me because I have added one more thing, Roland said with a smile. You are safe here with me. Even if we fight against the church, the enemy will not be able to hurt you, but if he dies, he will never see you again. That's a very effective persuasion, Ashes whistled. All right, Tilly spoke up to stop the impending quarrel. She also glared at Roland, as if blaming him for teasing her by saying such things. How do you plan to deal with the church's attack? Use guns and cannons to build a defense line under Coldwind Ridge. He took out a map from the drawer, spread it out, and pointed to the northern region. After receiving the information, I've already ordered the First Army to send war supplies to Deep Valley Town. At the same time, I've wiped out the church forces in the kingdom. In this way, the holy city of Hermes will definitely notice Grey Castle's movements, and then discover my intention to enter Coldwind Ridge, purposely letting the enemy know your movements. Andrea asked in confusion. With all due respect, generally speaking, this kind of deliberately leaked information is false, isn't it? Only in this way, I don't have to guess where they will invade Grey Castle, and the people will suffer fewer losses. Roland explained his plan. Facing the enemy head-on is the First Army's best fighting style. I see. Tilly nodded. It is indeed a simple and effective method. But there is a hidden danger, and that is the pure witches, he continued. In front of the firepower net, any visible enemy is not scary, but the church witches with completely unknown abilities may bring unpredictable trouble to the First Army. I think the witches who can also sense magic power are the most suitable to guard against them. That is also the purpose of our trip, Tilly replied. Don't worry, brother, the witches of Sleeping Island will fight side by side with you. After returning to the witch building, Tilly once again moved into her original room. The living room and bedroom were arranged in the same way as when she left. There was not a speck of dust on the table. Apparently, Roland had arranged for people to clean this place frequently. There were 3 wooden tubs for bathing at the door. Clean clothes were folded in them, and next to them were slippers that were easy to take off and put on. While living in the castle, bathing had become an important part of her life. Even in the palace, she had not tried to bathe so frequently. After all, water was really convenient. When she followed the scent and opened the cupboard, she found all kinds of seasonings, meat floss, and bread. She could see that these food were freshly baked today. As long as she was hungry, she could easily fill her stomach. Although she did not particularly care about these external comforts, when she saw this scene, she still felt a surge of warmth in her heart. Ah! I can bathe with scented soap again, Andrea shouted in the living room. Hey, there are even towels in this tub, and they seem to be brand new. Isn't it good to be new? No, I just think it's a waste for you to use it. What did you say? I think the rag you carry with you is quite suitable. After all, you can even take a bath in salty and smelly seawater. Why would you need a towel? Hearing the familiar bickering, Tilly smiled silently. It seemed that everyone really liked this place. Even the people of the Bloodfang Association had become different after coming to Neverwinter. At this moment, even she felt the same. It might be true for other witches, but compared to her, who had been deeply loved by King Wimbledon III, there was still a big gap between the level of luxury and the life she had in the palace. Many things here could only be said to be fresh and interesting, but not so luxurious. What attracted the witches here was something else. Staying in this city made people feel inexplicably relaxed. Previously, she did not understand why, but when Roland personally made tea for the 3 of them, she suddenly had a glimmer of understanding. He was definitely not pretending to be like this because he needed help from the witches of Sleeping Island. It was like he was used to this kind of thing and did it conveniently. No matter he was a lord, a prince, or a king, his attitude did not change at all. He regarded the witches as friends. It was not a deliberate facade, but an unintentional emotion. Are you all right? Ash's question suddenly came from behind Tilly. Tilly turned around, only to see that Ashes had gently closed the kitchen door. Why do you suddenly call him brother? Ashes hesitated. When we were on Sleeping Island, didn't you say that you were only helping yourself by helping him? And he's not like that Prince Roland at all. I don't think he's that stupid and cowardly brother, or rather, it doesn't matter whether he is or not. Tilly paused for a moment. Have you ever thought about what this war with the church means? Revenge. Chapter 598. Ashes looked surprised. Why do you ask? I've never thought of leaving you. I didn't mean that. Tilly knew that she had misunderstood. It's just that. This isn't a bad place, is it? Ashes hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. There's a reason why the Witch Cooperation Association is willing to stay and work for Roland. But we're different. We have our own home. There are only 3 endings to this war, Tilly interrupted her. First, we can't resist the attack of the God's Punishment Army and die in the northern region. In that case, neither Sleeping Island nor Neverwinter will have anything to do with us. You'll never sleep in that place. I swear on my life. Ashes quickly covered Princess Tilly's mouth with her hand and used honorifics in desperation. Tilly looked at her with a smile until Princess Tilly let go of her hand and said softly, "It's just a hypothesis. I don't think I'll die in the hands of the church." Then don't say it, Ashes said worriedly. What do you usually say? It's a prophecy. Tilly walked to the small kitchen window and looked at the vibrant castle garden. So I put it in the front. The second is that Roland fails, but we all survive. In this way, the whole of Grey Castle will be unable to resist the church, and Neverwinter will be in a sea of fire. He only has one place left. Sleeping Island? Yes, we'll continue to resist the oppression of the church there until the battle of divine will. The complete destruction is likely to happen hundreds of years later, which is also out of our control. What about the third? The third is that we defeat the church and uproot the holy city of Hermes, Tilly said with a smile. All witches will be freed from bullying and persecution and be truly liberated. When that day comes, the mission of Sleeping Island will also come to an end. It was originally a refuge for witches. After the fall of the church, we naturally didn't need to bind everyone to the Fjords Island. In terms of living environment, the Fjords is not a good place. It lacks resources and the weather is changeable. Of course, Sleeping Island will not be abandoned, and the sleeping spell will continue to operate, but everyone can choose to live in the city they like, right? Even if it's the abyss of hell filled with devils, I'll stay by your side. A world full of salted fish and fish soup is also like this? Ashes couldn't help but choke. Tilly could not help laughing. Don't worry, I'll get tired of it. Maybe I'll come to Neverwinter often in the future to change my taste. What are you guys talking about? Andrea pushed open the door and asked. She was carrying a wooden tub on her head and had even changed into a bathrobe. What are you planning to do? Ashes frowned. Take a bath. She curled her lips. I've been on the ship for more than 10 days. The salty smell on my body is overflowing. Of course, it's not surprising that some people don't notice it. Lady Tilly, do you want to go with me? Okay, Tilly replied. Wait for me to change. Ahem, then I'll go with you, Ashes said, pretending to be casual. Please, I didn't invite you. Andrea rolled her eyes. I'm going with Tilly, not you. Don't get the wrong idea. Looking at the two of them staring at each other, Tilly could not help but think that if they could really defeat the church, everyone could live like this. Roland was in a daze in the office for a while. He did not come to his senses until Nightingale waved the dried fish in front of him. When Tilly called him brother, she did not admit that they were siblings before they said goodbye last time, which made Roland very happy but also very puzzled. Did she really think he was Prince Roland, or did she see him as a brother in another sense? Isn't it just a brother? Nightingale said disapprovingly. If you want to hear it, I can call you that too. You're 3 years older than me. Where's your moral integrity as a noble? Roland thought helplessly. Brother and sister sounds pretty good. Stop, I can't go any further. Why did she suddenly change her attitude? Who knows? Maybe she saw that you didn't take advantage of the Bloodfang witch's dissatisfaction to split Sleeping Island and start a full-scale war with the church so soon. Compared to empty promises, these actions can prove your sincerity. Nightingale shrugged. But this is all my guess. Maybe she just said it wrong. Indeed, the reason was not important. The key was the fact. In any case, the relationship between the two of them would become closer. He had taken another solid step in his efforts to win over all the witches on Sleeping Island. Next, we should go to see Heidi Morgan, he said. Roland walked into the dungeon under the castle and saw her sleeping on a bed made of straw. The wound on her leg had healed, leaving only a lot of red and black blood. To ensure Nana's safety, I knocked her out before I treated her. Nightingale whispered in his ear. Otherwise, it would be too dangerous to take off the god's stone of retaliation. I heard from another witch of the Bloodfang Association that she tried to take Andrea as a hostage when she was surrounded. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been hit like this. Well, you did the right thing. As a powerful combat witch, Heidi's neck and wrists were locked with iron rings wrapped with god's stones of retaliation. Without special tools, it would be very difficult to take off these chains. According to Tilly, Heidi could cause the objects within 10 steps to collapse inwardly and cause fatal damage. This kind of collapse was not affected by other external forces. When it was released on the container, it made no difference whether the container was made of wood or metal. The wood would be smashed due to the violent bending, while the metal would be flattened into a ball. What was even more frightening was that it was also effective on living bodies. For example, the abdominal cavity, chest cavity, and other parts that had gaps would quickly close under the pressure of the ability, squeezing out the internal organs like soft mud. This made Roland involuntarily think of squeezing toothpaste. However, for him, Heidi's ability was more suitable for working in the factory than fighting with the enemies. If she put a mold in the raw material, she could easily act as a stamping machine, and this was only the simplest application. What if, through her studies, she realized that molecules and atoms were also full of gaps? Unfortunately, it was too late. "Wake her up," Roland said. Nightingale nodded and dashed into the dungeon. She lifted Heidi up and pulled her to the railing. Chapter 599. It took Heidi a while to figure out what was going on. She first touched her thigh, which had recovered, and then looked at Nightingale beside her. Finally, she looked at Roland and asked, "Did you cure me? Otherwise, Nightfall would have been dragged down by you." Roland found a chair and sat in front of the cage. He leaned over and asked, "Tell me, where are all the witches you rejected?" "Did he tell you about this?" "That's right, that witch named Annie is her friend." Heidi gritted her teeth and did not answer, but Roland saw a strong hatred in her eyes. "You could have taken them in. Archduke Island is the territory of Archduke Morgan, and you're his successor. It's impossible that you can't support more than 10 assistant witches." He said bluntly, "Even if they're useless, they only need to provide 2 portions of gruel a day. Moreover, assistant witches are much more useful than you think. The gun that Andrea used to injure you with is a weapon made by witches and ordinary people. It doesn't require many people to use it. Even a farmer who works with the soil all day long can easily kill an experienced knight with it." Heidi's expression changed and she suddenly raised her head. "What did you say? Ordinary people can use it? Do you think I conquered King City and became the king of Grey Castle by relying on witches?" Roland straightened up and leaned against the back of the chair. "If they could do that, they wouldn't be suppressed by the church and secular forces. That gun, how did you make it?" He looked at Heidi coldly until she realized her slip of the tongue. He then said sarcastically, "What, do you think this is a banquet in the palace?" She swallowed her saliva unwillingly and asked, "This is." "Nightingale is my woman, and it has nothing to do with Tilly," Roland said in a low voice. "I'll ask you again, where are all the witches you rejected?" "I let them go and let them find other witch organizations. I don't know their exact whereabouts. Maybe some went back to the nearby towns, and some went to the Kingdom of Dawn." "You're lying," Nightingale interrupted her before she could finish. "None of your words are true." "No, Your Majesty, she doesn't know anything. There's nothing to defend." Roland shook his head and said, "Nightingale can detect lies, and anything that goes against one's heart can't escape her scrutiny. Now do you know why Tilly shipped you across the fjords and sent you to the western region for trial? If you don't want to suffer, then tell me everything you've done. My patience is limited." Under the dim light of the fire, Heidi's expression was uncertain. It was obvious that she did not expect the other party to have such an ability. After a short silence, she suddenly grasped the iron railing and said loudly, "Your Majesty Wimbledon, the Kingdom of Wolfheart has been annexed by the Church, and the King of Wolfheart is missing. I'm the last bloodline of the Morgan royal family. As long as you help me take back the Kingdom of Wolfheart, I can bring you countless benefits. The Golden Dragon, jewelry. Yes, and witches. The Bloodfang Association will follow your orders. Is this the last thing you want to say? I can even give you half of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. With Blackstone Cliff as the boundary, all the land in the west will belong to you." "Enough," Roland said with a sneer. "I just want to know the whereabouts of those witches." "What?" Heidi said in disbelief. "My kingdom can't compare to those witches? Didn't you hear me?" Roland was a little annoyed. "The Kingdom of Wolfheart is not your kingdom, and I'm not interested in the land thousands of miles away. I'm just asking you out of the most basic etiquette between nobles. I have many ways to make you talk. You should know better than me about torture. It won't do you any good except suffering. Now, while I'm still here, tell me everything you've done, and I'll spare your life." Roland's last sentence was like a life-saving straw for her. "Will you really let me go? I always do what I say." Heidi lowered her head and hesitated for a long time before saying, "I gave them to the nobles." Roland's heart sank. Nightingale's hint also proved that she was telling the truth this time. "You didn't sell them to them?" "No, this is a deal in itself." She took a deep breath and said, "Relying on the witches awakened on the Archduke Island, I can't gather enough witches in my lifetime. I have to spread the reputation of the Bloodfang Association to all parts of the Kingdom of Wolfheart so that more witches can join us." Roland had done this before, although Tilly had taken the initiative, which resulted in little success. "Then I only need to hire rats to spread the news. What does it have to do with the nobles?" "The rats are controlled by the nobles. Once the news is noticed by the church, Archduke Island will be in big trouble." "The witches are a reward for the nobles?" "It's also a guarantee to win them over. After the nobles hide witches, they'll consciously pay attention to the church, control the spread of the rats, and even take the initiative to divert the attention of the holy city." Heidi said in a low voice, "I'll only spread the news to the nobles who are willing to accept witches. This way I can minimize the risk." Roland could imagine what would happen next even without asking. These non-combat witches would be locked in a dark room where they could not see the light of day. Few of them could survive the magic bite. Even if some were lucky enough to survive until adulthood, when the nobles got tired of them or when the church exerted more pressure on them, they would be thrown out of the room as a tool to divert the pressure. They would only end up dead. Heidi, who was in the cage, also noticed Nightingale's rising anger. She could not help but take 2 steps back. "Your Majesty, you promised me." Roland reached out to stop Nightingale. "Who carried out these things? Iffy said you didn't see Annie." "Skyflare. She's been killed by ashes. No one else." Roland asked. "Don't the witches in the Bloodfang Association know about this?" Heidi nodded. "Tell me." Roland secretly let out a sigh of relief. "One last question. Why did you recruit combat witches everywhere and establish the Bloodfang Association?" After a moment of silence, Heidi said, "At first, I just wanted to help my father ascend to the throne that should have belonged to him." She did not continue, but Roland already knew the result. After Grand Duke Morgan died, the Bloodfang Association became a tool for her to realize her desire for power. Walking out of the dungeon, Nightingale could not help but hold his hand. "Do you really want to spare the murderer's life? Heidi Morgan is a witch from Sleeping Island. It's not appropriate for me to deal with her. Tilly brought her to the Western region just to ask me to help her find out the truth." "You mean?" Nightingale's eyes sparkled. Chapter 600. The next day, Roland told the news to Tilly and the others. She actually gave a witch to those shameless nobles as a reward? Before Princess Tilly could speak, Ashes shouted impatiently. If it were not for Andrea stopping her, she would have gone straight to the dungeon. "Has Miss Nightingale confirmed it?" Tilly asked calmly. Just a few simple words, and she confessed everything. Roland recounted what happened in the prison in detail. "I thought it wouldn't be so quick to get the results. She's more fragile than I thought." According to his assumption, the interrogation yesterday was just a routine threat, and he did not intend to get any information. If Heidi refused to give in, the main course of the interrogation would be the main course. Because of this, he did not remove the god's locket of retribution from Heidi, and Heidi did not know that Nightingale's ability to detect lies was not based on sound, but on observation of magic power. "I see." Tilly nodded. "Thank you for doing this for me. I'm your brother. You don't have to be so polite." Roland took the opportunity to make friends. Besides, Heidi Morgan is a witch of Sleeping Island. It's only right for you to deal with her. "I see." Tilly was silent for a long time. "If this happened in Neverwinter, what would you do?" Roland stared at her gem-like eyes, only to see a little sadness and pity in her gray pupils. But more than that, there was unspeakable anger. She had made her decision. "I'll do the same," Roland comforted her. This sentence was equivalent to sentencing Heidi Morgan to death. Tilly no longer hesitated. She whispered something in Ash's ear. Ashes nodded and turned to leave the office. "Then I'll leave, brother." It was obvious that Tilly was in a very low mood. Roland did not know what to say at this time. Just as he was about to send her back to the witch building, an excited scream came from behind him. It came from the listening magic stone in Nightingale's arms. "This is lightning. I repeat, this is lightning. Asya has found the time of the accident." The little girl's words stunned everyone present. What did she see?" Roland asked. "Huge mouths, tentacles, and two monsters. I don't know how to describe them." Lightning sounded extremely excited. "This is an unprecedented discovery. My God. Your Majesty, you'd better come and see for yourself." "This is..." Tilly was puzzled. "They're exploring the Devil's Town behind the snow-capped mountain. The red mist there disappeared a week ago," Roland briefly explained. "I wanted to tell you about it today, but I almost forgot about the demons." Tilly took a deep breath. "But you can tell me more details on the way." "On the way?" Roland was slightly surprised. "Can't I go with you?" she asked, blinking. She was indeed the strong Princess Tilly. When faced with a critical situation, she could immediately adjust her state of mind and put aside her personal feelings, which was a necessary quality to be a ruler. Roland sighed inwardly. In this regard, she was far more talented than he was. Moreover, if he brought Tilly with him, it meant that Ashes and Andrea would also accompany him, which would greatly increase the safety factor. There was no reason for him not to agree. "No, of course, no problem," he replied with a nod. Heidi leaned against the cage, waiting for Roland to take her out. The Bloodfang Association was completely finished, and Tilly would certainly not allow her to return to Sleeping Island. However, as a member of the royal family of Morgan, she had found a new way to restore the throne. That was to rely on the secular power of the Kingdom of Grey Castle to help her regain the throne. Heidi believed in her own reward more than the promise of the other party. Perhaps because of his relationship with Tilly, it was inconvenient for him to agree directly. He insisted on asking about the whereabouts of the witches in order to give an explanation to Sleeping Island. She firmly believed that no nobleman would turn a blind eye to such a great temptation. Half of the fertile land in the kingdom of Wolfheart would bring him unimaginable wealth and prestige, and his name would be engraved in the annals of history and passed down forever. As for herself, she might be reviled by the nobles in the future, but she did not care. As long as she could become the queen of the kingdom of Wolfheart, she could abandon everything. Then, she could officially take revenge. She would take revenge on those nobles who had betrayed her and her father. She vowed to hang those traitors one by one and hang them at the city gate to announce to the public that this was the fate of those who framed Grand Duke Morgan. Suddenly, the iron door of the basement was pushed open, and the squeaking sound was particularly loud in the silent dungeon. Heidi immediately got up and looked at the end of the passage while leaning against the railing. However, it was not Roland Wimbledon who appeared in her sight, but Ashes, whose face was as dark as still water. She suddenly felt a chill rising from the bottom of her feet. What are you doing here? Where's His Majesty?" "You should be well aware of my purpose for coming here." Ashes walked step by step to the edge of the cage. Every time Ashes took a step forward, Heidi would take a step back. But soon she had nowhere to go. "When you handed over the innocent witches to the nobles, you should have expected that such a day would come." "No!" Heidi screamed. "His Majesty promised not to pursue this matter anymore. He has forgiven me. You're violating the king's order. Where is he? I want to see him." Ashes held the iron railing with both hands and forcibly pulled it open. She bent over and walked into the cell. Those witches came here with longing, hoping to seek shelter from the forerunners of the Bloodfang Association, hoping to sleep peacefully without being caught by the church, and not worrying about what to eat every day. But you let them down. Not only that, but you also sent them to hell. The witches escaped the siege of the church, but were harmed by their own kind. Even if Roland forgives you, I can't pretend that nothing has happened. Did this guy eavesdrop on my conversation with His Majesty? Or did he tell these things to Tilly and the others? Heidi touched the god's locket of retribution on her neck in horror, but it was completely wrapped by the iron ring and could not be removed with her fingers. Let me help you. Ashes approached the wall, reached out her hand and grabbed her neck, lifting her up in one go. The iron ring began to contract under Ash's strong grip, and Heidi soon found it difficult to breathe. Her body twisted like a dehydrated fish, and she kicked her feet to find a fulcrum, but all her attempts were in vain. Her vision gradually blurred, and Ash's figure became elusive. Why is this happening? Heidi did not want to die here. She was the only heir to the throne and the future queen of the kingdom of Wolfheart. The Fong throne seemed to be moving away from her, and she could hear the mocking laughter of the nobles. Chapter 601. That afternoon, Roland was ready to go to the snow mountain. Among them were camping tents, plenty of dry food, and a concrete paddle steamer. Since Devil's Town was located near the sea, he had to set off from Shoal Beach. According to the previous practice, Hummingbird was responsible for the transportation. Roland had to admit that when Hummingbird, who was as big as Nana, grabbed the side of the boat and lifted the whole concrete boat over her head, the scene looked very strange. It was like an ant moving a grain of rice several times bigger than itself. If she put the boat on her side and looked from the other side, she would see a ghost ship sliding silently on the land. As long as her hands did not leave the boat, she could always maintain this state. Compared with the original method of removing the weight of the object, this method of enchantment was much faster and consumed a lot less magic power. The only drawback was that Hummingbird had to follow the enchanted object, so she could only carry two goods at the same time. The paddle steamer went all the way west along the mountain and arrived at Stony Beach 2 days later. Last time, Roland had a bird's eye view of this land from the cloud gazer. Now that he stepped on the Stony Beach for the first time, he immediately felt a sense of desolation. The scenery here was completely different from Shoal Beach. It was only a few dozen miles, but it was like two different worlds. The Stony Beach was covered with the carcasses of various animals, which were embedded in layers of gravel. Some of them had been weathered, while others were gradually turning into new stones. Some of the bones looked very thick, almost as thick as the torso of an adult. Roland did not know what kind of creature left them. The steep rock wall was also very strange. There were countless sharp stalagmites growing on the surface of the rock. Different from the natural shape of the stalagmites in the karst cave, they were all hanging horizontally, and their ends were tilted upward, looking like countless barbs at first glance. This kind of gravity-defying landscape was incredible. He could not see it clearly from the balloon last time, but now that he was on the Stony Beach, he only felt creeped out. There was no sign of life on the long beach. There were no seabirds, algae, or sea mussels. Even behind the stone wall, there was nothing but emptiness, as if the red mist of the devil had taken away all the vitality here. According to the marks left by Lotus, Roland and his team found the narrow crack leading to the camp. It was more like a fault than a slit. The slender opening almost split the entire cliff, and it was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. It was precisely in this steep fracture that Lotus extended a narrow path that was half a meter wide. Nightingale couldn't help but exclaim as she walked along the stone steps into the one-line sky. "What's wrong?" Roland could not help but ask. "Look over there." She pointed to the depths of the crevice. "There's a hole in the rock wall." The team stopped in their tracks and craned their necks to look. Near the dark bottom, Roland saw a few circular holes, as if they had been carved out by something. "What is this?" "I don't know. I've seen this kind of hole in the impassable mountain range, but it's bigger there." She hesitated for a moment. "And the deeper I go, the more I feel like something is watching me." "There's something?" Roland was startled. "There's more than one," Nightingale nodded. "It's in the valley leading to the Witch Cooperation Association's camp. There's also a path leading deeper into the ground, but I've never gone down there. When Sylvie comes back, we'll take her to the impassable mountain range." He looked at the bottom of the fault again and suppressed the urge to send someone to climb down and explore. Then he ordered the team to continue moving forward. Although this continent was part of the Land of Dawn, and there were records of human settlement thousands of years ago, their understanding of the world remained in a very primitive state, as if they had deliberately neglected to expand outwards. Roland had once mentioned the map of the continent to Agatha, but was told that the Union had only made a detailed description of the fertile plains, and only a rough outline of the Land of Dawn. As for the areas beyond the Land of Dawn, nothing was known. This was also the reason why he decided to strongly support Thunder's overseas exploration. Roland had thought that sooner or later he would understand the whole picture of this world, but now he found that he didn't even know much about the western region of Grey Castle. Unfortunately, the war with the church was imminent, so he could only put these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind for the time being. After passing through the gap, the view suddenly became clear. The soldiers of the First Army immediately welcomed them into the camp, and then Roland saw Agatha and Soroya. "Where's Lightning and Summer?" "She's flying around with Summer." Agatha sighed. "She can't stop flying these days. Devil's Town has almost become her playground. If it were in the future, this would definitely be a national nature park that you'd have to buy a ticket to enter," Roland sighed. "What did you say?" "No, nothing," Roland coughed twice. "I'll call her back with the sigil of listening. Now let's go to the collapsed stone tower and have a look first." When they arrived at the center of the camp ruins, Lightning, Maggie, and Summer had just arrived. "Lightning, we're about to land." The golden-haired girl raised her hands and slowly landed on the ground. Then she turned around and gave Roland a big hug. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. In terms of age, Lightning had also reached that special stage. Oh. Then it was Maggie's turn. She also raised her wings flat and smashed her head on the ground, almost knocking Summer off her back. Lightning's reaction was understandable, but Maggie was obviously an adult witch. Roland thought helplessly, "It seems that this disease is contagious." "Since you're all here, let's start," he said to Summer, whose legs had turned to jelly. "Your Majesty." Summer limped to the edge of the pit and closed her eyes. In an instant, the big pit on the ground suddenly disappeared, and a huge black stone tower appeared in front of everyone. At the same time, the air was filled with a red mist that was as thick as blood. Roland subconsciously took a step back and held his breath at the same time. This is the scene before the change was about to happen. "It happened 26 days ago," Agatha explained. If Summer only used the backtrack ability once, she could maintain the illusion for nearly an hour, so we could observe everything that happened. "What about the eye demon that you said had eyes all over her body and could attract the attention of demons as long as she was stared at?" Tilly asked curiously. "At the top of this stone tower." Agatha pointed above her head. "But the height of the stone tower is beyond the range of Summer's ability, so we can't see it for the time being." Roland looked up and saw that the top of the tower was blank, as if it had been completely shaved off. It seemed that magic could only reproduce the scene within 5 meters of Summer. Just then, the ground seemed to tremble. "It's coming," Agatha said in a low voice. Chapter 602. It's here? What's here? Before Roland could ask, the ground under his feet suddenly arched upward and then split into pieces. The whole Blackstone Tower was lifted up in an instant. A giant gray beast rushed out from the ground and opened its bloody mouth, trying to swallow the bottom of the tower. The mucus on its skin splashed everywhere. Summer's ability could only replay the scene, not the sound, so Roland felt like he was watching a silent movie. However, the vivid scene still shocked him. As for the witches who saw it for the first time, they all screamed and stepped back with their hands covering their mouths. Ashes even instinctively drew her sword in front of Tilly. However, there was more than one terrifying monster. There was a tentacle monster hidden under the Blackstone Tower. Its dark body was almost completely embedded in the tower. At first glance, it looked like there were countless legs growing out of the bottom of the tower. However, the dark red light refracted from its scales showed that it was a living creature. Although the tentacle monster was almost half the size of a castle, it was still a little insignificant in front of the megamouth beast, which was big enough to swallow a tower. In order not to be swallowed, It waved its tentacles to support itself between the upper and lower jaws of the megamouth beast. At the same time, bursts of blood mist sprayed out from under its scales. There were obvious traces of corrosion on the megamouth beast's body. Obviously, this dense black mist could hurt it. However, compared with its huge body, the corrosion of the blood mist could not stop the megamouth beast from swallowing. As the tower was lifted up bit by bit, the tentacle monster finally lost its strength and fell into the megamouth beast's stomach under the weight of the tower. Then the Blackstone Tower slowly slid down until it was completely submerged in the megamouth beast's mouth. At the end of the video, Roland saw the demon covered with eyeballs. It seemed to be indifferent to the monster that had raided the camp. It lay motionless on the top of the tower and was swallowed along with it. At the end of the video, the red mist and the megamouth beast disappeared, and the scene became peaceful again. Only a huge pit was left, which told everyone that the scene just now was not an illusion. Roland heaved a long sigh of relief. He firmly believed that it was the right decision not to call the soldiers of the First Army to watch the battle. Even he himself felt his heart pounding when he watched the battle. Even after it was over, he still felt a lingering fear. Is this the worm monster that swallowed Miss Agatha's laboratory? Tilly broke the silence after a long time. Why would it attack the Devil's Town? Maybe we were all wrong. It might not be a hybrid demonic beast enslaved by the demons. At least, it's not controlled by the demons behind the snow mountain. Roland looked at Agatha and asked, "What do you think?" "I also agree with this view." Agatha nodded. Obviously, she had been thinking about this for a long time. There were no records of this kind of demonic beast during the 2 battles of divine will. If the demons really had the ability to control them, we wouldn't have lasted that long. As long as the enemies sent several megamouth beasts carrying senior demons to the city during the large-scale attack, Tequila would have long been reduced to ruins. If it's not the demons, then who's controlling it? Tilly frowned. And the group of transparent mantises that Miss Nightingale found. It's obvious that these demonic beasts have a plan. Can't they do it because they want to? Nightingale spread out her hands. Hybrid demonic beasts are not ordinary demonic beasts. Based on Evil Moon's performance, they already have the basic ability to think. As long as they live long enough, they may be smarter than us. This sentence made everyone burst into laughter, and the heavy atmosphere immediately dissipated a lot. Obviously, no one really thought so. After all, a bunch of monsters that ate raw meat, drank blood, and crawled around in the mud could be smarter than humans who baked bread and wore knitted clothes. This kind of thing was too unbelievable no matter how one looked at it. Only Roland did not say a word. He looked at the deep pit and his mind was in turmoil. Humans are the smartest species? He did not even dare to think so, especially in this completely unfamiliar world. When the living environment and living needs were different, the characteristics of intelligent creatures might be completely different. Take the demonic beasts for example, they certainly did not think that silk and bread were good things. Why didn't the eye demon react to the surprise attack? Andrea asked puzzledly. Didn't they say that as long as it looked at us, the whole camp would be awakened? Because it was not seen by anyone, Agatha explained. Only when we see the eye demon will see us. But that giant mouth beast, it has no eyes at all. It has nothing but a big mouth. Because it doesn't need eyes, Roland said. If it lives in the underground all year round, the use of eyes is very small. Just like earthworms, it doesn't need to evolve a special light-sensitive organ to guide the way. Evolve, what? Tilly asked curiously. The light-sensitive organ, such as the eyes, and the skin of some animals can also do this. He did not explain too much. Instead, he squatted down and pointed to the depths of the pit. Lightning, do you want to go down and have a look? The little girl nodded immediately. It's too dangerous, Ashes stopped him. We don't know what's hidden under the ground. You don't need to go deep into the tunnel. Just look at the direction of the giant mouth beast, Roland said. Nightingale will monitor the magic reaction from above. There won't be any danger. Hey, don't you want to follow the tunnel to catch it? Lightning pouted. Not this time. After all, It swallowed the demon, not Agatha. He repeatedly reminded her. When you find the direction of the tunnel, immediately come out and report to me. Do you understand? Got it. Lightning took out a portable torch from her backpack, lit it, and flew into the deep pit. The entrance is here. After a few seconds, Lightning's voice came from the magic stone. Do you see the fire? According to the position of the torch, Nightingale quickly determined the direction of the underground tunnel. No problem. You can come up. Looking at Nightingale standing in the southeast of the deep pit and the towering snow mountain behind her, Roland frowned more deeply. More than one person on the scene thought of this. It seems that we really guessed wrong, Tilly shrugged. The demonic worm beast we met in the concealing forest was not going to Devil's Town, but to this snow mountain. Chapter 603. The Observatory of Grey Castle, City of Dawn. After Timothy's downfall, Grey Castle had lost its name as King City. Astrologer of Dispersion Star had expected a turmoil, but the order of the city did not change much. People were still busy with their own lives. Farmers cultivated the fields in the suburbs, masons repaired the damaged city walls, blacksmiths hammered the armors in the shops, and the patrols continued to play the game of cat and mouse with the refugees in Blackstreet. At first glance, Grey Castle was still one of the most prosperous cities in the kingdom. Of course, it was not completely unchanged. For example, there were people leaving the old King's City every day to seek new opportunities in the western region. The old rival of the Astrology Association, the Alchemist Workshop of King's City, had moved out of the City of Dawn. Now, the palace had been replaced by a group of unknown nobles. They were constantly fighting to divide up the land and power left behind by the old nobles. They had completely forgotten about the sages. No one asked about the fate of the kingdom, and no one predicted the future. If it were not for the officials left by His Majesty who regularly allocated food and golden dragons to the astrology station, the apprentices would have already left. Fortunately, they could still maintain the operation of the association. As long as the astrology station existed, the mission of the astrologers would not stop. They would always look up at the starry sky. The sun slowly sank into the mountains in the west. The sky turned from orange to dark red and finally to dark purple. The work of the astrologers had just begun when night fell. An oil lamp was lit on the high platform, and the apprentices were moving the instruments out of the warehouse. They had to be very careful, as the careless apprentices who damaged the instruments would face the double punishment of being whipped and having their pay deducted, especially the celestial observatories sent by His Majesty, which were the most precious of treasures. When Astrologer of Dispersion Star first received the instruments in wooden boxes, he did not pay much attention to them. Although His Majesty had promised to bring more advanced instruments to the Astrology Association, the manufacture of the instruments was an extremely complicated process. Unlike the crudely made telescopes, the adjustable mechanism inside the tube would give the most skilled craftsmen a headache for half a month, not to mention the polishing of the crystal lenses. It would take about a year from the selection of materials to the completion of the stargazer, which would cost about 100 golden dragon stones. If there was anything in common between the Path of Sages, it would be that both were very expensive. It was just that the products obtained from alchemy were often welcomed by nobles and wealthy merchants, while astrology wasn't so lucky. Thus, only the capital of a country had the financial resources and manpower to build an observatory. As far as he knew, 2 years ago, Border Town in the western region was still a dilapidated and barren land. Even if they had plundered a large amount of wealth from all over the place, who would be willing to give these golden dragon to an unrelated astrologer? But when the wooden box was opened, Dispersion Star was dumbfounded. It was the first time he had seen such a stargazing tool. Unlike the bamboo-like instruments used by the association, the metal tube was as big as a bucket, and the glass mirror embedded in it was so bright that it could almost reflect a person's shadow. No matter how close he looked, he could not find a trace of polishing. The mechanism was also ingeniously designed. There was only a thumb-sized knob at the end of the tube. As long as he held it and rotated it gently, he could adjust the distance between the lenses. After adjusting the distance, he didn't need to lock it again, so it was very convenient to use. His Majesty sent 3 batches of 6 new stargazers in succession and gave them an easy-to-understand name: astronomical telescope. Since Dispersion Star had used it once, he was unwilling to look at those old-fashioned instruments again. The remaining 5 telescopes were naturally handed over to the 5 most experienced astrologers in the astrology station. "Teacher, all the stargazers are in place," Yun, the first disciple, reported. "Have you distinguished the stars?" He glanced at the record book in his hand. "The astrologer of Light Star, who is in charge of the North number 1, is ill today. Astrologer of Void Star will replace him. Then light up the starfire and start to observe the stars," the chief astrologer ordered. A raging flame rose from the brazier in the center of the astrology station. It symbolized Venus, the brightest star in the night sky. The astrologers standing around the brazier were its companions. The whole platform was arranged strictly according to the astrological signs. In this way, the astrologers stood in the sky and became one with the stars. In addition to the expensive stargazers, it took time to train people to look up at the stars. They could only rely on their own eyes. Therefore, to become a qualified astrologer, they had to learn how to protect their eyes. Dispersion Star was already 55 years old, but his eyesight was still better than most of the young people in the City of Dawn. It was not an easy task. After passing the selection and becoming an astrologer apprentice, they could only see the stars in the night sky. Reading books under oil lamps or candles was absolutely forbidden. In addition, they were not allowed to go out during the day or at noon to avoid the irritation of the strong sunlight. Their meals were also changed accordingly. Firstly, they had to eat animal organs and eyeballs. Secondly, they were not allowed to eat fish and spices. According to the knowledge passed down from astrology, eating more blood food could make the eyes brighter. However, fish was of the water attribute, and spices were of the earth attribute. The former would destroy the fire element in the blood food, and the latter would make the eyes dusty. Dispersion Star had persisted for more than 40 years. He believed that there was a limit to how long people could use their eyes. In order to observe the stars as much as possible, he seldom read books or star charts. Anyway, the patterns of the constellations had been deeply imprinted in his mind. The astrologer aimed his eyes at the observation hole, which was like a small tube at the end of the thick cylinder. Obviously, there was a beveled mirror inside, which could bend the light into his eyes. It was an interesting and practical technique. Although astrologers understood this principle, they had never thought of using it on the stargazer. Now it seemed that it could indeed greatly improve the viewing environment. At least, they did not have to stoop when they looked at the high star areas. Since the telescopes sent by His Majesty were much more effective than the old-fashioned stargazer, what the association needed to do was to reobserve and remap the existing star areas. Since using the 6 telescopes, they had found dozens of dark stars that were difficult to detect before. Dispersion Star swept over the area he was in charge of. Although the constellations formed different shapes according to the seasons, which might be difficult for beginners to grasp, for him, their light was as familiar as the stripes on his face. After observing the first star area, when he was about to move the telescope, a tiny light suddenly came into his eyes. In an instant, the astrologer felt his blood freeze. He held his breath and focused all his attention in that direction. It was not an illusion. A dim star was hiding between the hexagram and the blazing sky star. Its light was so weak that it seemed to be extinguished at any time. But what was different from the stars around it was... Chapter 604. Messiah Star's hands began to tremble, but it was not the time to make it public. When the bloody moon comes, the world will be plunged into an irreversible disaster. He naturally knew the significance of this prophecy. After taking a deep breath, the chief astrologer raised his head cautiously, fearing that he might accidentally touch the telescope and lose this hard-won star. He could find this position again even if he closed his eyes. Record it down. Between the hexagram star and the blazing sky star in the 3 eastern districts of early summer. Yun fumbled with the notebook and drew a circle at the corresponding position, which meant there was one more star on the astrological chart. Not for now. Teacher? Yun was slightly startled. Do as I say. Don't record the name, Dispersion Star repeated. Dispersion Star repeated. Summon all the scholars on the observatory and ask the apprentices to leave. His last word was almost a low growl. I'll do it right away. Yun was startled and then ran to the other astrologers. May the gods bless us, Dispersion Star thought. Soon, all the astrologers gathered around the chief astrologer. From his serious expression, they seemed to realize something. Since Roland visited the Astrology Association, the rumor of the Star of Extinction was no longer a secret among astrologers. The young king even suggested that the chief astrologer show the ancestral gold plate to all the astrologers, so as to enhance their sense of purpose when observing the stars, and to endow them with a sense of responsibility and honor. Dispersion Star did not know whether it was an illusion or not, but he always felt that His Majesty did not take the doomsday seriously. Chief Astrologer, did you? He nodded and said, I found a red star. His words made all the astrologers gasp. But I don't know whether it's a light spot or an illusion. Dispersion Star waved his hand and said, this phenomenon is very common in stargazing, so we need to recheck it, Void Star said. That's right. He nodded and said, let's start with you. An hour later, the 8 astrologers had seen all the stars. In order to eliminate the problem with the instruments, they also changed the telescopes twice and the old-fashioned star observatory once. Except for the latter, who couldn't see the red star, everyone could clearly see the dim star, no matter which telescope they used. One person might be seeing things, but it was impossible for all 8 of them to be the same. Among them, Rosette's star, who had the best eyesight, claimed that she had seen the outline of a star. The existence of the red star had been confirmed. Then the astrology platform fell into a strange silence. Dispersion Star didn't know whether it was a blessing or a punishment from the gods. Since they joined the association, all their efforts had been for this day. They wanted to find this star of extinction, which signified misfortune and disaster. But when he really found it, fear suddenly welled up in his heart. Their efforts had paid off. Their prediction of the disaster had saved the lives of tens of thousands of people. From this moment on, the Astrology Association had completely surpassed the Alchemy Association. This achievement could not even be measured by the Golden Dragon, but their warning was tantamount to the most vicious curse. Predicting the end of the world was a heavy responsibility for astrologers. What should we do? Someone asked after a long time. Normally, we should report this to the king. You mean Roland Wimbledon? Will he believe it? Even if he doesn't believe it, the star won't disappear. No, I mean he may not believe the prediction about the star of extinction. We have to try. After all, he gave these instruments to the astrology platform. He can't turn his nose up at our words. Who knows? He was famous for his stubbornness when he was in King City. If he was really stubborn, he wouldn't have let us stay. Enough. Dispersion Star raised his hand and interrupted the discussion. Don't disclose the information about the red star. Let's observe it for a few more days. He looked around at all the astrologers around him. It's far from enough to know its existence. I want to know its trajectory, its speed, and how long it will take for it to appear in the world. The more clues we collect, the more convincing our prediction will be. Do you understand? As you wish, Chief. All the astrologers bowed in unison. After a week of observation, Dispersion Star found the star more and more incredible. It wouldn't move. All the stars were moving. Sometimes they would appear on the horizon and then slowly rise to the sky. Some would disappear after midnight. This kind of change showed a regular pattern. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as a trajectory. However, the star of extinction showed no sign of moving. 7 days had caused the 6-line star to tilt slightly. When autumn came, it would gradually change from 6 horizontal lines to 6 vertical lines. As a result, the red star was moving away from the center of the 2 constellations. Because of this contrast, Dispersion Star was surprised to find that the star had not moved, as if it was not a star but a fixed background in the night sky. Since it wouldn't move, it couldn't get close to the 4 kingdoms. According to the prediction, the star of extinction must appear in the world. In other words, only when it could be seen by the naked eye would the disaster come. If what was engraved on the gold plate was correct, did it mean that the doomsday disaster would never come? The second point was that the light of the star was changing. This conclusion came from astrologer Rose Star. Her records showed that the star was getting brighter. At first, when she was the only one who mentioned this, Dispersion Star didn't pay much attention to it. After all, stars were very stable, unlike the moon, which changed shape and luster all the time. However, on the seventh day, astrologer Rose Star, who had recovered from her illness, also proposed the same idea. Moreover, they were the two astrologers with the best eyesight in the association. Therefore, Dispersion Star had to pay more attention to it. That night, after a discussion with the astrologers, astrologer Rose Star's sudden idea made everyone shudder with fear. If the arrival of the star of extinction means that all the people of the kingdoms can see it, is there a possibility that the star of extinction will eventually surpass the morning star and become a torch hanging high in the sky, even if it doesn't move? Is there a possibility that the star of extinction will become a torch hanging high in the sky and be seen by everyone? This sentence exploded in Dispersion Star's heart like a sudden clap of thunder. The people didn't know how to recognize the constellations, but it didn't mean that they couldn't see the stars. Some of the stars were almost as bright as the crescent moon. As long as it was a clear night, they could always be seen. What if that star had a unique and striking color? The answer was obvious. Chapter 605. Standing on the top floor of the Tower of Babel, Zero looked down at the busy holy city of Hermes. The number of believers going to the plateau had doubled compared to the previous years, and so had the new Judgment Army. The Kingdom of Everwinter alone had sent nearly 20,000 people to the church. The army that had been lost in the previous battles with the demonic beasts and the Kingdom of Wolfheart had been quickly replenished, and the scale of the church was even larger than at the beginning of the war. It could be said that His Holiness O'Brien's only correct decision to unite the four kingdoms. When Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn fell into the hands of the Holy City, the church would undoubtedly usher in a new peak. But it was far from enough, she thought. This peak was more than enough to rule the secular kingdoms, but it was still not as good as the union with the fertile plains. If the church wanted to win the battle of divine will, it had to do more. It's not Isabella this time? Zero suddenly heard Tayfun's voice behind her. She turned around and saw the three archbishops walking into the hall one by one. His Holiness sent her to the Kingdom of Dawn to carry out a supervision mission. Zero bowed slightly to show her respect. Today, I'll take her place in presiding over this meeting. Is His Holiness really so busy? Elle shrugged. He doesn't even have time to see us? Watch your attitude, a Solidal frowned. His Holiness has his own plans and you can't question them. I'm just saying that's all. It's true that he's very busy sitting in that position. Tayfun smiled. When His Holiness O'Brien was still here, I often heard Maine and Heather complain about it. Indeed. Zero gestured to the three archbishops and then walked to a small table by the window. Let's talk here. Not going to the secret chamber? Now that the church is in a good situation, who will eavesdrop on our conversation and leak it out? Zero said lightly. Even the most stubborn nobles know which side to choose. But there are always people who like to go against the current. Although Tayfun did not quite agree with her, he did not insist on going to the secret chamber. The other two archbishops were even more indifferent. You mean the fourth prince of Grey Castle? Who else could it be other than him? The old man took a sip of tea after sitting down and said angrily, Our plan to encircle the western region has failed. Not only the pure witches, but even the officiants have followed them back to Hermes. This is ridiculous. His Holiness allowed them to withdraw, Zero said unhurriedly. Do you mean me? Tayfun stared blankly. One step behind means one step behind. She nodded and said, Ever since Silver Whip was killed in Fallen Dragon Ridge, we've fallen behind Roland Wimbledon. By the time they received the news, it would already be 3 months later. It would definitely be too late to send out new people. so you don't have to criticize your pure witches. They will only become Roland's targets if they stick to Grey Castle. Doesn't he need to be punished? I want to take this opportunity to temper Emma's temper. Soli raised his eyebrows and said, "She always questions my orders." "That must be because your orders are full of loopholes," Elle said sarcastically. After all, it's difficult for a judgment warrior to use his brain. Before Soli could rebuke him, Zero had already said, "It may be helpful for you to listen to her questions. But I won't say much if you want to discipline your pure witches. Just don't torture them too much. Every pure witch is a hard-won treasure of the church." "Yes, Lady Zero. But why did Roland rob the god's stone of retaliation?" Taefun said thoughtfully. "Is it because of Silver Whip and Storm that he noticed the existence of the pure witches?" "Maybe he already knew," Zero said noncommittally. "Now we all know that he began to recruit witches a long time ago and even mingled with the people of Sleeping Island. Witches have all kinds of strange abilities, so it's not surprising that they know the news of the church. After robbing so many god stones, there's still no news of them selling them in large quantities. This is not a good sign." "Not necessarily." She knocked on the table to attract everyone's attention. "This is also the reason why His Holiness called you here today. The intelligence agency of the pivotal secret area has recently found that there is an abnormal purchase of food in Cold Wind Ridge. In addition, there are an incredible number of ships passing through the north of Redwater City. Almost 1 or 2 ships can be seen every day. However, no ships have been seen sailing to King City in Silver City or San Juan River." The three of them looked at each other and asked, "Where did all the ships go?" "Recently, you've been busy recovering the war supplies deployed in the Kingdom of Dawn, so it's normal that you didn't pay attention to the situation in Grey Castle," Zero said bluntly. "After eliminating the east and west sides, there's only one place they can go, Deep Valley Town in the northern region. There's the only tributary connected to the Redwater River there, and it's the nearest town to Cold Wind Ridge in the north of Grey Castle." Relying on the memory of the Queen of Clearwater, she knew the distribution of towns in Grey Castle like the back of her hand. In other words, Roland Wimbledon is mobilizing the resources of his territory and concentrating them in the northern region. The answer to what he wants to do is self-evident. None of the 3 bishops were stupid. They quickly understood the meaning of Zero's words, but understanding was one thing and believing was another. "Wait, do you think that Roland intends to attack the holy city of Hermes?" "It's not my opinion, but the conclusion of the intelligence agency's analysis." His Holiness also agrees with this speculation. The victory in King's City has boosted his confidence and made him believe that the holy city of Hermes is also vulnerable. It's not difficult to understand why he would make such a decision. It's true that his snow powder weapons are far stronger than Timothy's, but we're not unprepared. That's why His Holiness allowed the church personnel in Grey Castle to temporarily evacuate. Zero spread out her hands and said, "The nobles can't stop a man who's prepared to publicly declare himself our enemy and wipe out all the churches. He's crazy," Soli whispered. "Wimbledon and his family are all crazy." Elle swallowed. "Garcia is like this, and so is Roland. This news is very important. We should further confirm it." Taefun pondered for a moment. "How about I send my pure witches to Cold Wind Ridge to inquire about it?" "It's not necessary," Zero vetoed. "We'll attack Grey Castle sooner or later, so it's easier for him to concentrate his troops. In this way, we don't have to attack city by city like in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As long as we defeat Prince Roland, the war will be over." She looked at Taefun and asked, "How long do we need to prepare the supplies?" The old bishop said in a deep voice, "About 2 weeks. What if we send an advance army of about 1,000 people? Together with 300 God's punishment soldiers. We can set off tomorrow with this kind of army." "Very well." Zero stood up and said, "Instead of waiting for Roland to come to us, we'd better start with Cold Wind Ridge. Isn't he there to collect food? Maybe he can even compensate us for the loss of God's stones. Solidal, you'll be in charge of this advance army. Take Cold Wind Ridge within 3 days." However, she did not get an immediate answer. After a moment of hesitation, Tayfun asked. Is this your idea or His Holiness Main's? Zero suddenly felt a surge of anger in her heart. These idiots! I'm O'Brien's acknowledged successor and the legitimate successor of the Union. How dare they question me? She suppressed the anger in her heart and pretended to be nonchalant. She smiled and said, "Of course it's His Holiness's decision. If you have any questions, you can ask him yourself. However, the affairs in the pivotal secret area are very heavy, so it's better not to interfere with His Holiness's work unless there's something special." Chapter 606. Lightning flew into the castle office and handed Roland the last bird's-eye view of the snow-capped mountain. "You've worked hard," Roland touched the little girl's head and asked, "Did you find anything new?" "Nothing but snow." She closed her eyes and enjoyed it. "Not to mention demons and demonic beasts, I couldn't even see a big animal." "Is that so? It seems that I was thinking too much." Roland took out the previous drawings and looked at them again. Although these bird's-eye views were only sketches and were far less detailed and realistic than Soroya's photos, at least he could see the whole snow-capped mountain. The mountain was very large, about 4,000 meters high, and standing on the top, he could clearly see the sea of clouds. The peak was not as steep and sharp as he had expected, but it was a very open flat land with a slight depression in the middle, like a huge volcanic crater. Only the part of the depression was filled by a frozen lake, and the whole lake was like a clean mirror. According to Lightning, through the thick layer of ice, she could see running water flowing under it. "What do you think is on the peak?" "Ruins, black stone pagoda, towns. Nothing is strange," Roland said with a smile. "It is surprising that it is bare." He pointed to the newly drawn drawings and asked, "Is the source of the Redwater River here?" "Yes." Lightning tilted her head and glanced at it. "It's in the clouds. If I didn't hear the sound of water, I wouldn't have noticed it. There are many cracks on the mountain, and some of them are astonishingly large. Just the width is 200 or 300 meters. When you get close to it, the sound of water falling can be compared to the sound of thunder." "You didn't try to drill into it, did you?" Tell me the truth." "I tried, but I didn't succeed," the little girl pouted. "The cracks are big enough, and the height can even accommodate half of the castle, but the water mist brought by the torrent was too thick, and I couldn't see anything. Moreover, it was mixed with strong wind, so I was quickly pushed out." "Don't do such dangerous things again," Roland stared at her. "Do you remember what you promised me? I have to ask you for permission for any exploration." Lightning lowered her head. "That's right. I won't punish you this time. Go play with Maggie." "What about the snow mountain?" "That's it for now." He folded all the aerial maps and put them in a drawer. "We'll explore further and wait for Sylvie to come back. I need to focus on the war with the church." "All right." Lightning nodded and flew out of the window. "What do you think?" Roland looked behind him. "I'm here, Your Majesty." Nightingale appeared on the desk and sat cross-legged. "It's freezing on the snow-capped mountain. No one would choose to build a camp in such a place, right?" Since she had taken off her shoes, he couldn't help but glance at her feet, which were wrapped in white cotton socks. "Cough. So you also think that the giant maw demonic beast is hiding inside the snowy mountain? I just think that if they are so good at digging holes, it wouldn't be difficult for them to build a nest in the mountains. Also," Nightingale looked hesitant. "Also what? Are the holes in the impassable mountain range related to them?" Until the evening, Roland was still thinking about what Nightingale had said. Whatever it was a really creepy guess. If they were everywhere and were not trapped by nature, how would he be able to exterminate this group of terrifying monsters? Another thing that puzzled him was that since the giant maw demonic beasts could reach the edge of the Land of Dawn, there should be traces of their activities on the fertile plains. Why didn't the Union leave any records about them? Unfortunately, the current situation did not allow him to explore further. Only by completely defeating the church could Neverwinter have a future. After more than a month of transportation, he had sent nearly 4,000 soldiers to the northern region, as well as the corresponding armaments and provisions. According to the information from the front line, the field defense line was being built smoothly according to the plan. The communication line from Coldwind Ridge to the interior of the kingdom had also been cut off by the First Army. Soon, the last batch of soldiers would set off, and he would also follow the army to the northern region to command this war that could not be lost. Just then, there was a knock on the bedroom door. Roland opened the door and found that it was Anna who was standing outside. "I've seen Vendi's list, and my name is not on it." She walked into the room, her calm face expressionless. "Please forgive me, Your Majesty, but I can't accept this." If she had come to find trouble with him angrily, Roland would have known what to do. However, Anna's current expression made him feel a little afraid. It was as if she had made a decision, and it did not matter whether she lived or died. Ever since he rescued her from the prison, he had never seen Anna show such a look in front of him. Roland pulled her to the bedside and sat down. After a long silence, he said, "I know what you're thinking, but the military production in the border area is inseparable from you. Whether it's the parts of heavy machine guns or the fuse of howitzers, they all need you to process, and this is very important to victory. Not because the front line is dangerous. Of course there's a certain degree of danger in the battle with the church, but we'll definitely win, so you don't have to worry too much. Staying in Neverwinter is a more appropriate choice." He did not try to persuade Anna from the perspective of the safety of the war, because her expression had already made her attitude clear. Only by changing to a higher-level reason, such as using production related to the outcome of the war to persuade her to stay, would he be able to have an effect on her, who was very serious about everything. In this case, I'll also produce in Deep Valley Town. However, Anna was not moved. The northern region also produces iron and copper, so Miss Edith will certainly not be stingy with these ores. Lucia is also willing to accompany me, so there's no problem in refining. In addition, from the transportation point of view, the ships originally need to transport a complete set of guns, but now they only need to transport part of the parts and complete the assembly in the northern region, which will be more efficient. Her answer was orderly, and it was obvious that she had come prepared. Roland was speechless for a moment. Chapter 607. Then there was a long silence. Anna's eyes were not as calm as he had imagined. As they silently stared at each other, he felt an undercurrent surging under the blue lake surface. There was worry, fear, but more than that, determination. That was why she looked so determined. As time passed, this feeling grew stronger. Roland finally realized that he might not be able to persuade her. He closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. "Okay, but you have to promise me one thing." "Say it." "If something happens on the battlefield." Roland licked his lips. "I mean if I'm unlucky." "If something like that happens, I'll leave the northern region immediately," Anna said bluntly. Roland couldn't help but be stunned. "Are you worried that I'll take revenge on the church and lose my life in vain?" She stroked his cheek. "Only Nightingale and Ashes would do that. I'll return to the western region as soon as possible, then take all the people who are willing to follow you to Sleeping Island, settle down there, and continue to fight against Holy City. Your Majesty, although I want to be with you, I know you don't want to see this happen." At this point she paused. "So I can promise you that before the world you want arrives, I will continue to walk on your behalf until witches and ordinary people can live together freely." He did not answer, nor did he need to. Anna's growth was beyond his imagination. This was already the best reward for him coming to this world. She reached out and unbuttoned Roland's shirt. There was no need to say anything more. The two kissed and fell on the bed. Blackfire pulled down the curtains and pushed the clothes and bedding aside. At this moment, their fates were firmly connected, as evidenced by the stars in the sky. 2 days later, Roland gave his last speech before the battle in the square. Hearing the news, his subjects crowded the square. After a year and a half of development, the old border town no longer existed and was replaced by the bustling city of Neverwinter. The people's lives had changed dramatically, and Roland's reputation had risen to an unprecedented height. "Good morning, my subjects." He stepped onto the rostrum and was immediately greeted by overwhelming cheers. "Long live the king! Long live His Majesty!" There was no need for echoes to support them, and there was no need for any encouragement. The people consciously and passionately let out cries filled with respect, waving their hands like a surging ocean. After a full quarter of an hour, the cheers gradually subsided. "You should already know," Roland said in a deep voice as he looked at the countless pairs of reverent eyes below the stage. "The kingdom is about to face a war of self-defense against invaders. The enemy is the holy city of Hermes, which has annexed the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart. Now, only Grey Castle and the kingdom of Dawn survive out of the 4 kingdoms. Now they are targeting us. I know some of you used to believe in God and the church. This is not shameful. Your kindness was used by others, and your expectations were deceived. Should I not blame the swindlers and robbers, but blame you, the victims? Of course not." He raised his fist. "The church should pay the price. Just by selling God's stones of retaliation, they earn hundreds of thousands of golden dragon every year, and this money should belong to you. Why? The reason is very simple. The nobles are unwilling to spend a large sum of money to buy God's stones, so they naturally transfer this part of the cost to the subjects. Increase taxes, increase contributions, confiscation, forcible seizure. This is the reason. And it's far more than just God's stones. I believe you are no stranger to forced recruitment, such as building churches, permanent chief priests, and baptizing with holy water. If one asked what the people most easily understood and hated, it must be exploitation and oppression. The methods of the church were not as blatant as those of the nobles, but in the eyes of the battle-hardened Roland, it was not difficult to see through this thin veil, and at the same time, it was easy to pour dirty water on them. The church promised that the money would be exchanged for the protection of God, but what happened in the end? Before I came to Border Town, the people never had enough to eat or wear warm clothes. Famine and cold would still come every month of the demons. Those who couldn't endure it would close their eyes forever. As for those who survived, was it really because of the help of the church or the gods? No, they did nothing. Roland suddenly raised his voice. The only thing they were interested in was sucking your blood dry. These things were still vivid in the minds of the local residents, and most of the refugees from other cities had experienced the same thing. An angry uproar broke out in the square. Everyone blamed the pain they had suffered in the past on the church. "So I will never surrender, and I will not lose to such blood-sucking worms." Roland waved his fist and shouted, "The first army will crush them into powder, and no one will dare to rob my people again. You don't have to worry about building churches or paying money to atone for your sins, because these bullshit taxes will disappear in front of the new Grey Castle. It has been proven that without the existence of the church, Neverwinter will become a better place, and so will other cities. It's your hands and your spirit that created all of this, not those illusory things. This is the reason why I've repeatedly emphasized the glory of labor. Only labor can create wealth, and you are the most glorious workers. Feel honored for this. Without you, there would not be today's prosperity in Neverwinter." He pressed his hands down to stop the voices of his subjects. So the first army has set off to the northern region to fight against the church that has been watching all of this. If we lose, we will lose everything and return to the poor days in the past. Tell me, are you willing to go back to the past? The answer was self-evident. No, Your Majesty, we will fight against the church to the end. Kill them all. Drive them out of Grey Castle. Defend His Majesty with our lives. There were various answers, but everyone had the same expression. They were willing to defend everything that had been hard-won. Well said. I don't need you to fight the enemy. That's the responsibility of the First Army. You don't need to pay extra war taxes, that's what the enemy does. You just need to continue to devote yourself to the construction and production of Neverwinter, and that will be the best help to your loved ones fighting in the front line. Roland put his right hand on his chest and saluted. We will win. Long live the kingdom of Grey Castle. Victory! Long live. The people sang these 2 words over and over again, long after Roland had left. That afternoon, the last batch of soldiers boarded the paddle steamer. The army took the Roland as the flagship and set off. Chapter 608. When Duke Carwin walked into Jadeite Forest Castle, Edith was already waiting for him in the hall. "My dear daughter. What took you so long?" She interrupted him mercilessly. "As early as a month ago, I wrote to you to fully cooperate with the First Army in assembling and preparing for war. You must try your best to satisfy their requirements." The Duke's outstretched arms suddenly stopped in the air. "I immediately informed Earl Hire of Deep Valley Town and sent my steward to supervise this matter. Isn't this full cooperation?" "Of course." Edith crossed her arms in front of her chest in dissatisfaction. "Your presence in the town can show the sincerity of the northern region. Moreover, the battle with the church is of great importance. We can't overestimate it. But this is Earl Hire's territory after all. Come on, father. The nobles are about to disappear. Are you still fussing about the vassal's territory? I thought you would be a little more decisive after the rebellion of Hawes and the Lister family." Duke Carwin felt a little embarrassed. "I thought my daughter would at least give me a hug after not seeing me for a few months and express her longing for me, instead of talking about business before sitting down." "Is that so?" Edith sneered. "I wonder who was the one who flew into a rage in the study and yelled that this B****start of a daughter was simply a traitor and an ungrateful wolf cub? If I guessed correctly, you wanted to smash something at that time, but you couldn't bear to do it." The Duke could not help but choke. Damn it, which bastard leaked this? Before he could think of how to respond, Edith had already walked over and held him in her arms. "Welcome to Deep Valley Town, father. Is this okay?" The resentment in his heart immediately disappeared. He touched his daughter's long green hair, and for a moment, all kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. Although she was the daughter of the first wife, her character was very different from her biological mother, and even completely different from himself. Sometimes, even he did not understand how Edith grew up to be what she was today. She was not lacking in appearance, intelligence, or talent. If not for the fact that he could still see some traces of the first wife in her face, he would almost doubt whether Edith was his biological daughter. But when the two of them hugged each other, the Duke felt a sense of kinship. She was still the pearl of the northern region that he had raised with his own hands. After a while, Edith pushed him away in disgust. "You smell like sweat. You'd better take a bath first. I brought some scented soap from Neverwinter. Try one. It's much more effective than the honey locust. This kind of thing can wait for a while." Carr looked around. "By the way, where's Earl Hire? Why didn't he greet me in the hall? I drove him back to the Count's house in the suburbs." "What?" The Duke looked at his daughter in surprise. "He didn't take your Majesty's decree seriously and didn't take your orders seriously. If I hadn't arrived in time, I'm afraid he would have provoked the vanguard troops." Edith shrugged. "Not everyone can see the road under their feet. Some don't even have the courage to open their eyes. I won't say another word to this kind of person. Chasing him away is the most convenient choice." "Will he obediently give up the castle and the town?" "He won't, but I have the First Army." She smiled. "This army once conquered King's City in a day. What do you think a dozen knight can do?" He did not know if it was an illusion, but Edith had become a little different in just over 2 months. Her smile was more natural, not the aristocratic smile that she deliberately pretended to wear in social occasions. And her eyes were a little more at ease. Carr thought that this expression had disappeared a long time after she became an adult. She liked her current life, he realized. At least, she was happier than when she was in the northern region. This made him a little jealous and a little emotional. Perhaps, as his daughter said, after being stripped of her aristocratic identity, she would indeed lose some of her rights, but it also unlocked the fixed shackles of the fief. Now she was going to a broader field. In the study of the castle, Carr drank 2 large cups of black tea in one gulp, let out a long breath, and then asked, "What we need to do now is to wait for His Majesty to come?" "There's still a lot to do." Edith spread out her notebook. "Food, horses, cloth, herbs, and all the materials needed for the war have to be transported to Deep Valley Town. By the way, I received a new secret letter from His Majesty. Iron ingots and copper ingots should also be transported here, the more the better. He wants to empty the entire northern region, the Duke thought. Do you really think His Majesty can defeat the church? He may not be able to break into the holy city of Hermes and completely uproot the church, but it's not too difficult to prevent the church from entering the kingdom under Cold Wind Ridge. She paused. What His Majesty lacks most is time. Time? You haven't seen his factory, so it's difficult for you to understand the power of Neverwinter. Edith looked at her father. Whether it's a knight, a mercenary, a judgment army, or a fanatical believer, they're no different in front of bullets. And these amazing bullets are produced continuously in the factory like running water. Any civilian only needs to be taught for half a quarter of an hour to use firearms and bullets to kill the enemy. If they're trained for a month, they can have a soldier who can go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. And after 3 months, they'll be the invincible First Army. What are you trying to say? The growth rate of people is far slower than that of bullets, father. It's different from swords and armors. A blacksmith and a dozen apprentices can make 10 sets of armor and 30 swords in a year, but a factory can produce more than 1,000 bullets a day. After a knight armed with swords and sabers is crushed into powder, there'll be hundreds of extra bullets distributed to those who want to become a knight. The next day, these bullets can be given to the residents and newborns in the city. After a month, the bullets produced are enough to turn this city into an empty city of the dead. Calvin opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. It's normal that you don't believe it. After all, these things sound a little against common sense. But I participated in the tooth extraction campaign with the First Army and saw how they dealt with the enemy with my own eyes. Edith said slowly, so as long as the First Army holds the line, His Majesty will get the victory he wants sooner or later. 3 months later, Neverwinter will be able to train an army of thousands of soldiers and the corresponding weapons, and it's not enough time for the new Judgment Army to learn how to hold a sword. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.